The rifle fired once. One round, one breath. One moment that stopped every man on that range cold. The target was 1,547 meters downrange. Nearly a mile of wind, heat shimmer, and moving air. A distance that elite snipers trained years to reach. A shot that required computers, spotter teams, atmospheric calculations. She had none of that. She had a borrowed rifle, a faded uniform, and hands that didn't shake. When the instructors ran to the scoring terminal, they went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with respect. It had everything to do with fear. The particular kind that hits a man when he realizes he has just humiliated the wrong person. And they had been doing it for 6 weeks. If this story finds you wherever you are, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Like, follow and stay until the end. You won't see this ending coming. The morning Mara Quinn arrived at Blackstone Tactical Training Base, it was raining sideways and nobody held the door. She stood at the intake desk with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a manila folder of transfer paperwork in her hand, water dripping off the brim of her patrol cap onto the linoleum floor. The desk clerk, a young specialist named Dooley, who wore his rank like it meant more than it did, took one look at her assignment sheet and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Equipment management," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's what the paper says. Building 7, around back. There's a sign." He slid the folder back across the counter without stamping it. "You'll need to get that processed at the S1 office first. They close at 11:30 for lunch." It was 11:42. Mara looked at the clock on the wall, then at Dooley. Then she picked up the folder, tucked it back under her arm, and walked out into the rain without a word. Dooley watched her go and turned back to his screen. Already forgotten. That was how it always started. Blackstone Tactical Training Base existed in a crease of high desert that the maps didn't bother naming, 40 miles from the nearest town with a gas station and another 20 from anything with a decent cell signal. It was the kind of place the military built specifically to be uncomfortable, the theory being that discomfort sharpened the mind and sharp minds won engagements. The base trained advanced infantry, scout units, and the long-range precision fire program that had produced some of the best marksmen in the service. The ranges stretched east into a valley that caught crosswinds off 2 different mountain ridges, which made it ideal for precision work and miserable for everything else. The equipment warehouse sat behind Building 7 and smelled like gun oil, rubber, and old cardboard. Mara's workspace was a metal desk wedged between 2 shelving units loaded with range bags, cleaning kits, and spare optics that had been waiting for calibration since the previous fiscal year. There was a folding chair with a cracked seat, a computer that ran a version of Windows that had stopped receiving security updates, and a handwritten note taped to the monitor that said, "Do not touch the fiber cable." She sat down. She read the inventory manifest. She started working. That was week 1. The Precision Fire program ran its qualification cycle in cycles of 8 weeks. The trainees who moved through Blackstone were not raw recruits. They were already experienced soldiers, chosen for aptitude, filtered through preliminary testing, and sent here to be turned into something more precise. Most of them arrived with the specific energy of men who had been told they were exceptional and had started to believe it. The lead instructor cadre was built around Commander Victor Kane. Kane was the kind of officer who filled a room without trying, which was a quality that could go either direction depending on what was inside the room. He was 6'2", rangy, with the kind of face that looked perpetually unimpressed. He had legitimate credentials, 3 combat deployments, a Distinguished Service Cross, and a personal long-range record that still stood in the program's rankings. The trainees respected him with the mixture of admiration and anxiety that effective instructors tended to produce in people who were trying hard to be seen as capable. The problem with Kane wasn't his ability. It was what his ability had made him believe about everyone else. Mara encountered him for the first time on her 3rd day when she was moving a cart of rifle cases from the armory to the range prep bay, and he nearly walked into her coming around a corner. "Watch it," he said, stepping around the cart. "Sorry, sir." He glanced at her, at the cart, at her uniform with no unit patch, no marksmanship badge, no visible indicator of anything, just a name tape and a rank, and the particular blankness of someone who had been made invisible so many times they'd stopped fighting it. He kept walking. That was the whole interaction, 40 seconds. Neither of them would remember it the same way. The range schedule ran from 0600 to 1700 most days, with a midday break that the trainees used to eat, clean rifles, review data books, and do the kind of quiet suffering that long-range precision work required. The equipment management section was responsible for staging gear, maintaining the scoring terminals at each lane, swapping out wind flags, and running the target mechanisms when they malfunctioned, which they did, constantly, because the motors were on their 4th year of a 2-year service life. Mara became part of the furniture. She fixed a target motor on lane 9 that had been intermittently failing for 3 weeks, doing it in 40 minutes with a parts kit and a manual she'd found filed incorrectly in a binder labeled Mess Hall Requisitions. She reorganized the cleaning kit inventory so the range staff could actually find components without the 15-minute search that had previously been treated as an unavoidable cost of doing business. She recalibrated 2 spotting scopes that had been logged as defective and set aside for depot-level maintenance, identifying a parallax adjustment that had drifted on both of them. She didn't announce any of this. She wrote it in the maintenance log and left it on the desk. Nobody read the maintenance log. The thing about 6 weeks of being invisible is that it gives you time to watch. Mara watched the trainees run their morning drills, the way they set up their positions, how they managed their breathing, where they put their elbows. She watched the instructors call wind, correct for elevation, coach trigger control. She watched the range from the equipment bay window while she logged serial numbers into the inventory system, learning the rhythm of the place the way you learn a language by listening before you ever try to speak. She watched Kane run a qualification scenario on a Friday afternoon, a multi-target engagement at ranges staggered from 600 to 1,100 meters with a 5-minute time limit and a wind shift introduced at the 2-minute mark. He talked the trainees through his process in the flat, economical voice of someone who had explained the same thing many times and was no longer interested in making it interesting. "Wind red is perishable," he said, pacing behind the firing line. "You read it at setup, it's already history. You read it at the moment of the shot, you're still guessing. The skill isn't the read, it's learning to accept the uncertainty and fire anyway. Hesitation kills data." The trainees wrote it down. One of them, a young sergeant named Briggs, who Mara had noticed because he asked better questions than the others, raised his hand. "How do you know when you've waited too long, sir?" Kane looked at him. "You'll feel it, eventually." It wasn't a great answer, but it was an honest one. Mara turned back to her inventory sheet. The restricted lane was lane 14. It sat at the far end of the range complex, separated from the active training lanes by a low berm and a chain-link barrier with a padlocked gate. The lane had been taken offline 6 months earlier when a malfunction in the automated target mechanism had sent a target carrier off its rail and nearly struck a range safety officer. The repair parts were on order. The gate stayed locked. The distance board at the far end still read 1,547 meters, the longest confirmed engagement distance the lane had ever been set up to support. The key to the gate lock hung on a hook inside the equipment bay, labeled L14, maint only. It was the kind of key that nobody bothered to secure properly because nobody thought anyone would want it. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the 6th week. The trainees were running a stress shoot, a qualification evolution designed to simulate engagement conditions after physical exertion. They had just completed a 4-mile ruck at pace, dumped their packs at the firing line, and were transitioning to their rifles with heart rates in the 150s. The pressure was deliberate. The scoring was real. The instructors walked behind the line calling out times and making the kind of comments that were technically professional but carried an edge specifically calibrated to add psychological load to an already difficult task. Mara was on the range for a legitimate reason. Lane 7's target motor had thrown an error code, and she'd been called to reset it manually. She'd done the reset, cleared the fault, and was walking the long way back along the outside of the berm when she saw the gate to lane 14 was open. Not broken open, not damaged, open, because the padlock hadn't been seated properly the last time someone had passed through, and the wind had pushed it. She stopped. She looked down the lane. At the target, tiny and still at 1,547 meters, bleached by the afternoon sun. She should have closed the gate and kept walking. Instead, she went through it. There was a rifle already staged inside the lane, not standard issue. It was a precision bolt action in a chassis system chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum with a first focal plane scope that Mara recognized as the type that had been pulled from service inventory 8 months ago pending rezeroing. It was sitting on a maintenance table inside the small covered prep bay at the head of the lane, presumably waiting for the repair work that would accompany the target mechanism fix. She checked the chamber. Empty. Checked the bolt. Smooth. She picked up the rifle. She found 2 rounds in a small box of range ammunition left on the table beside it. The kind of administrative oversight that happened when ranges were shut down quickly. She loaded one. Set the bolt. Climbed into the shooting position at the lane's firing point. The wind was blowing from the northeast at approximately 11 miles per hour with variable gusts. She could see it in the grass along the berm line and feel the direction against the left side of her face. The air temperature was pushing 94. The target at 1,547 meters looked like a postage stamp. She didn't have a data book, no ballistic calculator, no spotter. She made her corrections in her head, the same way she'd done it for years in places she was not allowed to talk about. And she fired. The rifle cracked. The recoil pressed back against her shoulder. Downrange, the scoring terminal beeped. Center mass. Bullseye. She was already unloading the second round when she heard boots on the gravel behind her. Hey! The voice belonged to Sergeant First Class Owens, one of Kane's assistant instructors. A compact, sun-weathered man with the kind of permanent squint that came from years of working outdoor ranges. He stopped 5 feet from the open gate and stared at her. What in the... Who authorized you to be in there? Mara stood, cleared the weapon, set it back on the table. Gate was open. I saw the lane and... Who? Authorized. You. Nobody. Yeah. He put a hand on his radio. Yeah, that's what I thought. Don't move. He didn't call it in discreetly. He said it loud enough for the trainees on the adjacent range to hear, because that's how things worked at places like Blackstone. A problem became a public event, and a public event had an audience, and an audience gave shape to whatever narrative was about to be established. By the time Kane arrived, there were 11 trainees standing along the berm. Kane came through the gate like a man who had already decided what he was going to find. He looked at Mara. He looked at the rifle on the table. He looked at the scoring terminal still displaying the impact data. Equipment management, he said. The way he said it was not a greeting. Yes, sir. You want to tell me what you're doing in a restricted lane with a rifle that isn't yours? The gate was unsecured. I didn't ask why you were in here. I asked what you were doing. He picked up the terminal display, looked at the number, set it back down. Something moved behind his eyes, a quick recalculation, and then his expression settled back into dismissal. That reading's from a malfunctioning terminal. This lane has been flagged for equipment issues. The terminal was functioning. I reset the error on lane 7 myself. This system reads clean. A few trainees shifted along the berm. Briggs was among them. Kane looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a decision that was not about her. It was about the audience. You're telling me you just fired a precision rifle, chambered in .338 Lapua, at 1,500 meters, without a data book, without a spotter, and hit center. That's correct. He laughed. It was not a mean laugh, which made it worse. It was the laugh of a man who found something genuinely ridiculous, the involuntary response to an absurdity that didn't require malice to sting. What's your background? Infantry? Admin? Let me guess. You used to shoot competitively in high school. A few of the trainees laughed too. Not all of them. Briggs didn't. Mara said nothing. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and she looked at Kane with the particular stillness of a person who had long ago stopped needing other people to understand what she was. The target speaks for itself, sir. Kane's smile didn't fade, but it changed quality. Prove it. The next thing happened fast, the way things do when a crowd is already watching and a decision has already been made before anyone articulates it. Kane had one of their instructors retrieve a rifle from the active inventory. A properly zeroed precision system. Correct data book present, all conditions normal. He staged it at the lane 14 firing point. He set the target at 1,547 meters. He told Mara to load a single round and demonstrate what she claimed to have done. 11 trainees, 4 instructors, 1 range safety officer who had appeared from somewhere and was now standing with his arms crossed, uncertain whether this was a safety issue or not. Mara picked up the rifle. She checked the zero data in the book. Not because she needed it, but because she needed to know what the rifle had been zeroed to, what adjustments had been logged, where the point of impact sat relative to the reticle at 100 meters. She turned the turrets on the scope, clicking through the elevation and windage adjustments with the deliberate economy of someone counting steps in a familiar room. Kane watched her do it. Some of the dismissal in his face shifted into something else. Attention, reluctant and wary. "Anytime," he said. She got into position. This was the part that changed the character of the afternoon. Mara Quinn in a shooting position looked like a different person from Mara Quinn standing at a desk or walking through a warehouse. The change was not theatrical. She didn't become sharp or intense in any visible way. She became still. The specific kind of still that the human body almost never achieves, the absence of micro-movement, the biological quieting that happens when the nervous system has been trained past its own noise. Her breathing slowed, counted, slowed again. 11 people watched without making a sound. The rifle fired. The sound rolled out across the range and bounced off the valley walls and came back diminished. And in the 2 seconds between the shot and the return data from the terminal, nobody moved. The terminal beeped. Bullseye. The silence lasted longer than it should have. Kane's jaw worked once. He looked at Owens. Owens looked at the terminal. The RSO took a step forward, looked at the display, stepped back. "Lucky," said one of the trainees, a sergeant named Calloway, who had a habit of filling silence with the first thing that occurred to him. "Range conditions, fluke? Set up the movers," Kane said. His voice had changed. Not angry, not impressed. Something more careful than both. The moving target system on lane 14 was not supposed to be operational. It was part of the mechanical fault that had taken the lane offline. But Kane pulled out his radio, called the range maintenance section, and in 12 minutes a technician had bypassed the fault and brought the traverse mechanism online. 3 target carriers, each on an independent track, each moving at variable speeds between 3 and 7 miles per hour on unpredictable directional shifts. The system was designed to evaluate advanced-level shooters. The trainees in the current cycle hadn't been scheduled to run it until week 8. 5 rounds, Kane said. 5 targets. We'll see what fluke looks like repeated. Mara looked at the loaded magazine the technician had set beside the rifle. Then she looked downrange. "Moving targets are going to need a different position angle on the 2nd and 4th carriers," she said. "The traverse track bends at about the 1,200-meter mark. If the wind holds from the northeast, I'll need to lead differently on the rightward moving targets than the leftward." She wasn't talking to Kane. She was talking to herself, organizing her process. Kane stared at her. "How do you know the track bends at 1,200? I read the maintenance manual for this system when it was logged for repair." She picked up the magazine. It was in the binder with the mess hall requisitions. Sergeant Briggs made a sound that he quickly converted into a cough. She fired 5 rounds, 5 hits. Not all of them perfect center. The 3rd carrier had accelerated unexpectedly, and she caught it at the 4 o'clock position rather than dead center, which Owens noted on his clipboard with the scrupulousness of a man who needed something to write down. But the 5th shot, a rightward moving target at 1,547 meters, crosswind gusting to 15 miles per hour, the carrier in a random direction shift. She called out loud before she fired. Leading 4 feet, aiming for the right third of the target. She fired. The carrier shifted direction mid-flight. The round still hit. Not center. Not the 4 o'clock. Dead center. Because she had accounted for the shift. Nobody said anything for almost 10 seconds. Then Calloway, in a voice stripped of its earlier confidence, said, "How did you—" "The hydraulic motor on the shift mechanism has a half-second lag between the randomization trigger and the physical direction change," Mara said, sitting up from the rifle. "I could hear it cycling before the shift. Once I knew the timing, I could adjust." She stood, cleared the rifle, placed it back on the table. Kane was watching her with an expression that she recognized. She had seen it before, in different places, on different faces. It was the look of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew, while simultaneously refusing to finish the calculation, because finishing it would require him to say something he wasn't ready to say. "What is your actual background?" he said. "Equipment management, sir. I'm on the warehouse team." "That's not what I asked. It's what my assignment sheet says." She picked up her maintenance kit from the lane prep bay. Kane was still standing there when she walked through the gate, back into the heat of the afternoon range, back toward Building 7. She could feel the stairs following her. Behind her, she heard Briggs say quietly, to no one in particular, "Who the hell is she?" Nobody answered. The next 3 days were an education in the specific ways that institutions deal with things they don't understand. The first response was administrative. Kane submitted a report to the base operations section citing the unauthorized use of a restricted lane and unsecured equipment, which was accurate, and requesting a formal inquiry, which was also reasonable. What was less reasonable was the supplemental note he added characterizing the incident as a potential safety violation by a support staff member with no documented marksmanship qualifications. The report was technically correct. It was also constructed to land in a specific way, to preemptively establish a narrative before anyone started asking questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. The second response was social. Among the trainee cadre, the story spread the way stories do in closed environments, fast, and changed in the telling. By Thursday morning, the version circulating through the barracks had Mara either secretly a former competition shooter who'd washed out of the program for discipline issues, or a civilian contractor playing soldier, or, in the version that Calloway apparently found most satisfying, someone who had gotten lucky twice and was now going to face serious consequences for being in a lane she wasn't authorized to use. None of the versions made her anything other than a curiosity or a problem. Briggs didn't participate in the speculation. Mara noticed that too. What Kane didn't anticipate, what none of them anticipated because they didn't have access to the information that would have changed everything, was that the report he submitted was flagged, not by the base operations section, not by the range safety office, by someone else entirely. Mara knew the flag had been triggered because she had set up the alert herself 3 years ago through a channel that officially didn't exist, tied to a name that officially belonged to a dead woman. It was the kind of administrative tripwire that intelligence professionals built into their cover identities, the way builders install smoke detectors. You hoped you'd never need it, but you put it there because you were thorough. She knew the flag had been triggered because on Thursday evening, her secure phone received a message that said only, "Clock is running. How long do you need?" She typed back, "Give me a week." The response? "You have 4 days." She put the phone down on her bunk and looked at the ceiling of the equipment bay where she'd been authorized to sleep since there was no available berthing in the support staff section, and the billeting office had put her on a waiting list without telling her how long the wait was. The ceiling was corrugated metal, and the sound of the wind outside moved across it like a hand. 4 days. She thought about whether that was enough. Then she decided it would have to be. On Friday morning, Kane changed the schedule. The trainees were supposed to run a data collection exercise, a methodical, low-pressure range day focused on building ballistic profiles for their individual rifles across multiple distances and conditions. Kane scratched it. Instead, he put them on the field qualification course, which was the highest-stress formal evaluation in the program, the one that determined graduation standing, the one that would follow them in their records. He also, without putting it in any official scheduling document, added a station. Station 7 on the qual course was normally a static engagement at 900 meters. Kane reconfigured it as a simulated scenario. 2 threat targets at 1,200 meters, 2 at 900, and 1 at 1,500, all appearing in randomized sequence within a 90-second window, with a second shooter providing sporadic fire to simulate a contact environment. It was not a standard qualification station. It was not supposed to be on the course. And when the trainees gathered at the range brief that morning, Kane announced that the support staff would be observing the qual run as part of an administrative review. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Mara was standing in the back of the formation. She understood exactly what he was doing. The qual run went through the morning. Trainees rotated through the stations in pairs, and the scores were real and official and would be processed by the S3 section by end of day. Most of the trainees performed at the level they'd been training for. Solid, competent, occasionally excellent. Briggs shot the highest score through Station 4, which Mara noted without expression from her position near the scoring section. When they reached Station 7, the irregularity became visible to anyone paying attention to the timeline. The reconfiguration of the targets, the addition of the simulated contact element, the way the instructors managed the setup with a deliberateness that was slightly too careful. Owens found her during the Station 6 rotation. Commander Kane wants you to run Station 7, he said. Not asked, said. I'm on observation status. He's requesting it as a voluntary demonstration to close out the administrative review. Owens had the look of a man who had been told to say something and was saying it exactly as instructed. You can decline. Can I? He said nothing. She looked at the Station 7 setup, at the 5 targets, at the secondary fire position where the simulated contact shooter was staged with a semi-automatic rifle loaded with blanks, timed to fire in bursts calculated to create cognitive interference. She understood what Kane thought this was. He thought this was a controlled experiment with a predetermined outcome. He thought she'd gotten lucky twice and a third attempt under real pressure, real scoring, real observation, real noise and environmental stress would produce a different result. He thought that result would explain the first two and restore the order he needed. He was wrong about what kind of person she was, but he wasn't wrong about what the next few minutes were going to show. Tell him I'll run it, she said. The Station 7 setup required a shooter to enter from a designated entry point, identify the threat sequence as targets appeared, engage in order of priority while managing the auditory interference of the blank fire, and complete all 5 engagements within 90 seconds. Mara entered the station in the faded uniform, no body armor, carrying the issued precision rifle with the databook she had not opened. The blank fire started immediately, loud, irregular, from her left at approximately 30 meters. The first target appeared at 900 meters. She fired. Hit. 2 seconds. The second target appeared at 1,200, then a third at 1,500, overlapping the second, both visible simultaneously, which was not in the published scenario parameters. She registered the deviation without reacting to it, shifted priority to the longer distance first because the 1,500 was a stationary exposure, while the 1,200 was beginning to move, fired twice in sequence. Hit, hit. The blank fire shifted direction, now from her right, designed to produce a flinch response in shooters who hadn't been in enough real environments to separate the sound of incoming from the sound of contact. She didn't flinch. Targets 4 and 5 appeared in the final 30 seconds, both at 900, both moving. She fired 4 rounds, hit both, had time to reload and chamber a fresh round before the 90-second tone sounded. Total engagements, 5. Total hits, 5. Time, 81 seconds. The scoring terminal printed the result. The range was quiet. Not the audience watching something unexpected quiet from before. Something older. The quiet of a group of people who were no longer certain they understood what they were looking at. Kane stood at the scoring table. He looked at the printout. He looked at Mara. For the first time she saw it in his face. Not anger, not dismissal. Something worse. The beginning of a question he hadn't wanted to ask. "Where did you train?" he said. It came out low, almost private, like he hadn't quite meant to say it out loud. Mara handed the rifle to the range safety officer, cleared and safe. "My transfer paperwork is on file with your S1 section," she said. "You can request it any time." She walked off the range. Behind her, she heard Briggs say something to the man beside him in a voice too low to catch. But she heard the tone. The tone said, "Something is very wrong with what we thought we knew." She kept walking. That evening, Owens found her in the equipment bay. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides in a way that was different from the way he usually stood. Less official, less managed. He looked like a man who had spent several hours working through something and had arrived at a position he wasn't comfortable with. "You have a scar," he said. "Left forearm. I saw it when you were in position this afternoon." Mara didn't look up from the maintenance log. "People have scars." "Not like that. That's a through and through. Entry and exit, both visible, subcutaneous tissue disruption across about 6 centimeters. I've done enough trauma work to know what that kind of wound means in terms of how it was received." He paused. "That's a gunshot wound. Sustained at close range, probably in a dynamic environment because the angle of entry suggests you were moving when you were hit." She said nothing. It also wasn't treated in a hospital. Field suture, possibly self-applied. Whoever closed it was working under time pressure. He came 2 steps into the bay. "I have a lot of questions." "I know you do." "Are you going to answer any of them?" Mara finally looked up. She looked at him for a moment, measuring something that she didn't share. Go home, Owens, she said. Get some sleep. By Monday, your questions are going to answer themselves. He studied her face. Whatever he saw there, or didn't see, made him step back. Yes, ma'am, he said. He hadn't called anyone ma'am in this interaction until that moment. He left without explaining why he'd said it. Saturday passed quietly. Sunday was quieter. On Monday morning, a government vehicle, unmarked, black, civilian plates registered to a federal procurement office that didn't process vehicle registrations for any department that admitted to existing, rolled through the Blackstone main gate at 0730. The gate guard called it up the chain. The duty officer called the base commander. The base commander made 2 phone calls and then stood in his own office with the receiver in his hand for almost a full minute, saying nothing before he put it down. At 0800, a second vehicle arrived. This one was military. A staff car, dark blue, with a 3-star plate. The trainees were at morning formation when the vehicles reached the range complex. Word moved through the formation the way it always did. Fast, not in words, in posture, in the way eyes tracked without heads turning, in the collective recalibration of atmosphere that groups of people perform without knowing they're doing it. Kane came out of the range operations building and saw the vehicles. His face did something complicated. What is this? He said to Owens, who was standing beside him. I don't know, sir. Who authorized? The door of the second vehicle opened. The man who stepped out was in a navy dress uniform with 3 stars on each shoulder board. Rear Admiral Travis Mullen was 61 years old, with the kind of face that had been in the weather long enough to have stopped being affected by it. He moved like a man who did not experience uncertainty, which was either a quality he'd been born with or one that had been burned into him over 40 years of service until it became indistinguishable from temperament. He didn't look at Kane. He didn't look at the vehicles or the formation or the range buildings. He looked at Building 7, at the equipment bay. Mara heard the vehicles. She had been expecting them, but expecting something and having it arrive are 2 different sensations. And she took a moment in the equipment bay, surrounded by the smell of gun oil and old cardboard, in the faded uniform, with the folding chair and the cracked seat and the ancient computer, to simply stand there. Then she walked outside. The formation watched. Briggs, second row from the left, would later say that the moment she stepped out of Building 7 was the moment he understood that something fundamental had shifted, not just in what they knew, but in what the situation actually was. She walked across the gravel in her faded uniform. The Admiral saw her. He walked toward her. They met in the middle of the open ground between the parking area and the range buildings, in front of every trainee, every instructor, and Kane, who had stopped moving entirely. The Admiral stopped 2 feet from her. He saluted her. Not a casual salute. The proper salute. Full, deliberate, formal. The kind that carries weight because it is given to someone who has earned the right to receive it. Mara returned it. Master Chief, the Admiral said. Admiral, you're a hard woman to find when you don't want to be found. That was the point. Yes. He looked at her for a moment. It was time. Kane's voice came from 20 feet away, quiet, changed. Master Chief? The Admiral turned. He looked at Kane the way a man looks at something he has already categorized. Commander Kane, he said, I believe we have some things to discuss. He turned back to Mara. Master Chief Quinn, or would you prefer to continue with the equipment manifest? And for the first time since she had arrived at Blackstone 6 weeks ago, Mara Quinn smiled. It was a small smile. Brief, the kind that costs something. I think the manifest is in order, she said. The man from the first vehicle, the civilian, the federal official whose department didn't officially process vehicle registrations, was already inside the range operations building with Kane's administrative files open on the desk when the formation was dismissed. He had a briefcase, a recorder, and a list of names. Kane's was at the top, but it was not the only one. And standing in the morning light with the 3-star flag behind her, Mara Quinn looked out at the faces of the trainees, at Briggs, who was already standing differently, at Calloway, who had gone very still, at Owens, who had known something was wrong and had said, yes, ma'am. She looked at all of them, and the thing that moved through her expression was not triumph. It was older than that. heavier. The look of a woman who had been through fires they couldn't imagine, carrying a name that was officially attached to a dead person, in a faded uniform in a warehouse that smelled like gun oil, and who had been waiting, with the patience of someone who had learned to become invisible, for the moment when the truth no longer needed her to protect it. That moment was now. What came next would be everything. The civilian from the first vehicle had a name, Garrett Holt, and he had the particular quality of stillness that came not from calm, but from professional habit. The practiced neutrality of a man who spent his working life in rooms where the temperature changed without warning and who had learned to give nothing away until he chose to. He sat across from Kane in the Range Operations Building with a yellow legal pad, a government-issue pen, and the administrative files spread in front of him in a way that suggested he had already read everything in them before he arrived. Kane had been in that chair for 11 minutes. He hadn't been told to sit. He'd sat because standing felt wrong, and standing felt wrong because the morning had stopped making sense approximately 45 minutes ago, and his body hadn't caught up to the fact that the rules had changed. "Commander Kane," Holt said, without looking up from the file. 12 years at Blackstone. 2 before that at Fort Benning. Before that, 2 combat deployments. 1 in theater, 1 advisory capacity. He turned a page. Distinguished Service Cross. Commendation Medal with V device. Solid record. I know my own record. I'm sure you do. Holt looked up then, and there was nothing in his face. No judgment, no hostility, nothing that Kane could push against. Walk me through the week of the 14th, specifically the range incidents involving the support staff member designated Quinn M. Kane's jaw tightened. It was a safety matter. An unauthorized individual accessed a restricted, "I read your report." Holt's voice didn't change. Walk me through it in your words, not the report's words. Outside, the admiral had moved to the shade of the overhang near the range prep building, where someone had produced 2 metal folding chairs and a bottle of water that nobody had asked for. He sat in one chair. Mara sat in the other. Between them was the particular silence of 2 people who had history that didn't need explaining. Admiral Travis Mullen had last seen Mara Quinn 4 years ago, in a situation that had not been comfortable for anyone involved and that had produced 2 separate classified reports, 1 congressional briefing, and a formal decision to designate Master Chief Mara Quinn as operationally deceased for reasons of mission security and personal protection. She was, officially, dead. She had been dead for 3 years, 11 months, and some days. She had apparently spent that time reorganizing cleaning kit inventories and recalibrating spotting scopes. "How long did you know this was coming?" the admiral asked. "About 6 weeks. And before that? I knew it would come eventually. I just didn't know the form it would take." She looked at the range. The training lanes were empty now. The morning session had been canceled, and the trainees had been sent to their billets without explanation, which was itself a form of explanation. "How much trouble is he in?" "Kane?" "Yes." The admiral was quiet for a moment. "That depends on what Holt finds. The conduct report was there were procedural issues with the way the evaluation on Friday was set up. The Station 7 reconfiguration wasn't authorized. The scenario parameters were outside the curriculum framework, and the presence of a support staff member as an unofficial subject in a formal qualification exercise raises liability questions that the base commander is, as of this morning, very interested in resolving." That's a diplomatic way of saying Kane used a real qual run to try to embarrass someone he thought was a nobody. That's also an accurate way of saying it. The admiral looked at her sideways. "You didn't have to let it get that far. The moment you accessed the restricted lane, I know. You could have walked away. I know that too." He waited. He had known Mara Quinn long enough to know that there was a reason she'd done it the way she'd done it, and that she would tell him what it was when she decided to. "I needed to see how the program ran," she said. "Not the paperwork version, the actual version. What happens when someone doesn't fit the expected profile? Whether the instructor's correct for bias or lean into it." She paused. "You're about to ask me to take on something new." "Yes. And you needed me to know whether this place was salvageable before you did." The admiral said nothing for a moment. Then, "Was it worth 6 weeks in a warehouse?" Mara looked at the range. At the empty firing lanes, the wind flags turning slowly in the morning air, the scoring terminals blank and waiting. Ask me again in a few days, she said. The trainees were not in their billets. This was technically where they'd been told to go, but the order had been given without specifics, and the billets were hot and close, and none of them had any capacity at the moment for lying on a bunk and staring at the ceiling. They were in the common area of the barracks building, a low-ceilinged room with plastic chairs, a mounted television nobody had turned on, and a coffee machine that produced something adjacent to coffee. And they were doing what soldiers do when something significant has happened, and nobody has told them what to think about it yet. They were talking. Calloway was at the center of it because Calloway was always at the center of things that involved filling silence. She's got to be former special operations, he said. Some kind of support role they don't publicize. Radio operator, maybe. Someone who is attached to a team. Radio operators don't shoot like that, said a sergeant named Devereaux, who had come into the program from a scout platoon and who was one of the quieter members of the group for most reasons except this one. What she did on Station 7, that last shot, the one where the carrier shifted, I've been in this program for 7 weeks, and I'm not sure I could replicate that under the conditions she had. And I've been training for it. So what are you saying? I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't think she's a radio operator. Briggs was sitting apart from the main group in a chair near the window that looked out on the parking area. He could see the 2 vehicles. He could see the overhang where the admiral and the equipment clerk, he had to stop calling her that in his head, were still sitting. The admiral saluted her, he said. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when someone says the thing everybody was thinking. I noticed that too, Devereaux said. Not like a courtesy thing, Briggs said. A real one. Full. The kind you give to... He stopped. The kind you give to someone who outranks you or who has done something that earns it in a way rank alone can't measure. He didn't finish the sentence because he wasn't sure how to end it accurately. Master Chief, Calloway said. The admiral had called her that. The title had made it around the formation in about 30 seconds. That's an enlisted rank. Senior enlisted, Devereaux corrected. E9, top of the scale. Admirals don't salute E9s. No, Briggs said. They generally don't. The room sat with that for a moment. Owens came through the door, still in his instructor uniform, and the conversation stopped the way conversations stop when someone enters who might have actual information. He looked at the group, read the temperature of the room, and pulled a chair to the edge of the circle without being asked. What do we know? Devereaux said. Less than you want and more than you'd expect, Owens said. He picked up someone's abandoned coffee cup, looked at it, put it back down. What I can tell you is that the 2 vehicles that came through the gate this morning represent 2 separate interest levels in what happened on this range over the last week. The military vehicle is connected to Navcia Flagstaff. The civilian vehicle is... I don't know exactly, but the man who got out of it has federal written all over him, and he's been in with Kane for almost an hour. Is Kane in trouble? Calloway said. Kane may have some things to work through, yes. Because of her? Owens looked at him. Because of the way he handled the situation. The woman he was handling it toward. That's a separate conversation. He paused. I'll tell you what I told myself last night, which is that we don't have enough information to understand what we're looking at, and I'd suggest not filling that gap with assumptions. You said ma'am to her, Briggs said. Owens looked at him. Yeah. Why? A beat. Because it felt right. That wasn't an answer. It was also the only one Briggs was going to get, and somehow it was more informative than a full explanation would have been. Inside the Range Operations building, Holt had moved past the administrative file and was now working through a series of questions about the Station 7 setup. Specific questions, procedural questions. The kind that built a factual architecture around an event, without ever saying explicitly what they were building it for. Kane was not a stupid man. He understood what the questions meant. He answered them accurately, which required him to acknowledge things he would have preferred not to acknowledge. That the Station 7 reconfiguration had not been formally authorized, that the support staff member had not been given a formal choice about participating, that the scenario parameters had been deliberately set outside the standard curriculum. Why? Holt said. Because I needed to... Kane stopped. He tried again. She'd performed well under controlled conditions. I wanted to see if that held under... Under what? Pressure. Holt wrote something on his legal pad. What kind of pressure specifically? Kane looked at the wall. The kind that reveals whether a performance is repeatable or situational. That's a reasonable training objective, Holt said, in a tone that made clear he did not think the motivation behind it was a reasonable training objective. Who authorized the scenario modification? I did. In your capacity as lead instructor or in your capacity as base authority? Lead instructor. Did you document it? No. Holt wrote something else. Did you inform the base commander that a support staff member would be participating in a formal qualification evolution? The pause before Kane's answer was long enough to be its own answer. No. Holt capped his pen. Thank you, Commander. I'll have follow-up questions later in the day. Kane stood. He wanted to ask something. He could see it. And Holt waited to see whether he would. What is she? Kane said. Not who. What? Holt picked up the file. That information isn't part of this inquiry. It should be. Maybe. He set the file down. But it isn't. What? The admiral left at noon. He left in the blue staff car without ceremony, after spending approximately 45 additional minutes with Mara in a conversation that nobody else was present for and that produced no visible documentation. Before he got in the vehicle, he stood beside the door for a moment and looked at the range, at the empty lanes, the distant targets, the heat rising off the valley floor. 4 days, he said. After that, I need an answer. You'll have one, Mara said. It's a good program, he said. Or it could be. I know. He got in the car. The car left. Holt's vehicle stayed. Mara went back to Building 7. She went back to the equipment bay, to the metal desk and the cracked folding chair and the computer that ran the obsolete operating system. She sat down. She opened the inventory manifest. She started working. The knock on the equipment bay door came at 1400. Not Owens. Not Holt. Briggs. He stood in the doorway with his patrol cap in his hand, which was the kind of unconscious gesture that people made when they were somewhere they weren't sure they were supposed to be. He was 26 years old and had been in the Army for 6 years and had been accepted into the precision fire program on his second application, which meant he'd been turned down once and had not stopped trying. You wanted something, Sergeant? Mara said. I wanted to... He stopped. Reconfigured. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the way the cadre treated you, last week and before. The mocking thing. Mara looked at him. He was not the one who had mocked her. He had stood in a formation where other people did it and had not participated, which was a distinction that mattered even when it wasn't enough. Did you participate? No? Did you say anything? A beat. No. Then what are you apologizing for? He thought about it. For not saying anything. She studied him for a moment. The honest answer, not the smooth one. Sit down, she said. He sat in the second folding chair, the one she'd found in a storage closet and added to the bay on her second week because there was occasionally a need for a second chair, and she preferred to plan for the need rather than scramble when it arose. It was also cracked. Everything in the equipment bay was cracked or faded or overdue for something. How long have you been working on your 600-meter splits? She said. He blinked. How did you know that was... I watched you on this range. You're consistent at 500, you stutter at 6. Your split time between first and second shot goes up by almost a full second. It's not a technique problem, it's a cognitive hesitation. Something happens at the 600 threshold that makes you process instead of act. He stared at her. I've been working on that for 3 weeks. Kane said it was a trigger control issue. Kane is wrong. She turned back to the manifest. It's an anticipation problem. You've hit enough misses at 600 that your brain started preloading the possibility of failure at that distance. You're second-guessing the read before you've even finished making it. How do you fix that? You stop treating 600 as a different distance than 500. You stop marking it in your mind. The round doesn't know where the target is. What? Only you do, and right now you're giving the distance more weight than the shot. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Are you going to stay? Mara said nothing. After whatever this is, he gestured vaguely in the direction of the parking area, the departed vehicles, the afternoon that had not gone the way anyone expected. Are you going to be here? She looked at the inventory manifest. That's still being determined, because he stopped again. He was doing that a lot, she noticed, starting sentences and then deciding to tell the truth instead of finishing whatever the first draft was. Because if you stayed, and if you were, he set the patrol cap on his knee. I think a lot of people could learn something from someone like you, that's all. I'm not trying to pressure you. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Go work on your 600 transitions, she said. The range is open. The session was canceled. The organized session was canceled. The range is open. He stood, picked up the patrol cap, moved toward the door, and stopped. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Go shoot. He went. Holt found her at 1600 when the light had started going amber and the temperature had dropped by 4 degrees, which in the high desert counted as a significant weather event. He didn't knock. The equipment bay door was open and he walked in with the legal pad and looked around the bay with the systematic attention of a man cataloging his environment automatically, a reflex so ingrained it wasn't deliberate anymore. Organized, he said. It was a disaster when I got here. I believe it. He stood near the shelving units, not threatening, not casual either. Something deliberate about the positioning, close enough to be direct, far enough to give her room. I have a few questions for you, not for the report. Background. You can ask. How long have you been here? 6 weeks. By your choice or by placement? The placement was mine. He wrote something on the pad. The admiral's presence here today. Was that something you requested? The flag was automatic. I didn't request him specifically. But you knew someone would come. Eventually. Holt looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who had spent a career evaluating what people chose not to say. The conduct toward you over the past 6 weeks, the way the cadre handled the Lane incident, the way the Station 7 exercise was constructed. Did you intend for it to go that far? Mara was quiet for a moment. I intended to see how it played out naturally. That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one. He looked at the legal pad, then at her. Off the record, why did you come here specifically? She looked at the shelving unit, the rows of range bags and cleaning kits, the spotting scopes now properly calibrated, the inventory that was finally accurate for the first time in what the record suggested had been years. Because this program produces the people who will be in critical positions for the next decade, she said. And I wanted to know whether what they were learning about leadership matched what they were learning about marksmanship. And? The marksmanship instruction is excellent, she said. Kane is genuinely skilled. The curriculum is well designed. The facilities are good when they're maintained, which they weren't. And the leadership part? That's why you're here, she said. Holt capped the pen. He looked at her for a long moment in the amber light of the late afternoon, in the equipment bay that smelled like gun oil and old cardboard, and his expression was the expression of a man who had just confirmed something he'd suspected for a while. The admiral wants you to take a position here, he said. It was not a question. He mentioned it. Are you considering it? I'm considering a lot of things. He nodded once. For what it's worth, and I want to be clear that this is personal, not official. What you did on that range, the way you managed the situation, the restraint, that's a specific skill set. Not everyone coming out of the kind of work you were doing retains the capacity for restraint. It tends to burn out. Mara said nothing. I've read your file, he said. The classified one. All of it. He paused. I wanted you to know that. The significance of that statement sat in the air between them. If Garrett Holt had read the classified file, not the official one, not the transfer paperwork, the real one, the one with the operations that officially hadn't happened and the citations that officially didn't exist, and the documented events from locations that officially bore no American footprints, then Holt was not a mid-level federal investigator working a conduct complaint. He was something else entirely. And the visit today was not only about Kane. Mara looked at him. What does your department actually investigate? She said. Holt smiled. It was the first expression she'd seen on his face all day that resembled a human reaction rather than a professional one. Program integrity, he said. Among other things. He set a business card on the desk. Plain, government issue. Name, number, a department designation that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't supposed to know what it meant. When you've made your decision about the admiral's offer, he said, I'd appreciate a conversation. Different topic. He left. Mara looked at the card for a moment, then she turned it over. On the back, in pen, a single line of text that wasn't a phone number or an address. Ridgeline Protocol. Ask me when you're ready. She set it down. Outside, the sun was going down behind the western ridge, and the shadow of the mountains was moving across the valley floor the way it always did here. Fast and total, the light there and then gone. The temperature dropping through the floor in a matter of minutes, because the desert kept nothing once it decided to let it go. She heard, distantly, a rifle shot from the direction of the training range, then another. She looked out the bay window. In the fading light, she could see the small figure of a shooter in lane 4, running the 600-meter target in a methodical rhythm. Shot, cycle, breathe. Shot, cycle, breathe. No instructor, no timer, nobody watching. Briggs. She watched him work the distance. The first few shots she could read even from here, the slight delay she'd identified, the hesitation at the threshold. But he was doing something she hadn't told him to do. He was going back to 500 between each 600 repetition, deliberately, repeatedly, building the connective tissue between the two distances, refusing to let his brain treat them as separate categories. He'd figured out the fix himself. She'd given him the diagnosis. He'd found the medicine. She watched him for a while. The shots got cleaner. The rhythm smoothed. Not perfect, not nearly, but the hesitation was fading. He was starting to shoot 600 the way he shot 500, like it was just a number, not a threshold, not a place where failure lived and waited. She turned back to the manifest. The inquiry into Kane's conduct ran for 2 full days. Holt interviewed every member of the instructor cadre, individually, in a room in the range operations building that was small enough to be slightly uncomfortable and had a table with a scuff on it that Mara had noticed 3 weeks ago and had been meaning to add to the maintenance log. He interviewed the trainees too, not all of them, but enough. Briggs, Devereaux, Calloway, who came out of his session looking like a man who had been asked precise questions about casual things he'd said in the hearing of other people and was reconsidering what casual meant. Kane was interviewed twice. The second session was longer than the first. Mara was not interviewed again. Holt had what he needed from the Monday conversation, and the follow-up questions he'd mentioned never materialized, which she understood to mean that the follow-up was happening through other channels, through the people who had been present, through the documentary record of what had actually occurred versus what had been logged as occurring. The base ran quietly during those 2 days. The training sessions resumed on Tuesday. A stripped-down schedule, 2 range evolutions instead of 4. The advanced tactical scenarios moved to a tentative slot later in the week. The trainees shot their assigned evolutions and returned to the billets, and existed in the careful way that people exist when they understand that the institution around them is being evaluated and that their own conduct is part of the data set. Owens ran the Tuesday sessions. He was a different kind of instructor than Kane, quieter, more specific, less interested in the psychological texture of the range and more interested in the technical one. He called good wind. He gave corrections without commentary. The trainees responded to it. On Tuesday evening, Calloway knocked on the equipment bay door. Mara looked up. He stood in the doorway in his off-duty clothes, a gray t-shirt, cargo pants, boots still on, because he was the kind of person who didn't fully relax until he was horizontal. He had the look of a man who had been working up to something for a while and had finally gotten there through a combination of genuine feeling and the inability to sleep. "I said some things," he said. "Which things specifically?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The lucky shot comment. And then after the movers, I said, I made a couple of comments in the formation about you trying to—" He stopped. "About support staff getting above themselves. Something like that." Mara waited. "It was a stupid thing to say," he said, "and it was wrong." He said the second part like it cost more than the first. I didn't want to be one of those people who doesn't say anything." She looked at him. There was a difference, she had found, between people who apologized because they wanted to stop feeling bad and people who apologized because they understood they'd done something that mattered. The difference was visible if you knew what to look for. Calloway was in the second category. He still wanted to stop feeling bad. That was human, and she had no issue with it. But that wasn't the primary driver. The primary driver was that he'd been interviewed by a federal investigator and then sat alone in his bunk for 2 nights and arrived at the conclusion that the kind of man he wanted to be was not the man he'd been on that range. "Don't tell me it won't happen again," she said. "You don't know that." He opened his mouth, closed it. "What you can tell me," she said, "is that the next time you see someone being underestimated, you'll make a different choice about whether to contribute to it or not. That's the thing that's actually in your control." He nodded, once, like a decision. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He left. She went back to the manifest. Wednesday brought a change in the weather. The wind came off the northern ridge instead of the northeast, which shifted the ballistic conditions on the range significantly enough that the morning elevation data was wrong before the first shot was fired. The scoring terminals logged the dispersion patterns and flagged it, and the range staff spent 40 minutes recalculating drop data for the day's exercises before they could begin. Mara had noticed the wind shift at 0500 when she was running her own morning routine in the equipment bay. The physical maintenance she didn't discuss with anyone, the work her body still required to remain what it was regardless of whether anyone knew it was what it was. She had logged the shift time, the directional change, and her estimated impact on the standard elevation holds used by the current trainee cohort in a handwritten note that she left on Owens' scheduling board before the cadre arrived. Owens found the note at 0615. He read it. He recalculated the morning data against her estimates. She was close, closer than the terminal's automated flagging had been. He walked to the equipment bay at 0630 before any of the trainees were on the range. "How did you—" He stopped. "You knew about the wind shift at 0500. I was awake. Our wind monitoring system didn't catch it until 0540. The monitoring system reads from the tower at the range end. The shift was coming off the ridge, which means it hits the far end before the range tower. By the time the tower catches it, you've lost 12 minutes of lead time." She didn't look up from the desk. "You'd want to put a supplemental monitoring station at about the mid-range berm. Something simple, a mounted weather vane with a data logger would be sufficient." Owen stood in the doorway for a moment. "There's nothing in the maintenance log about a supplemental station," he said. "No, I haven't had authorization to procure the equipment." "What would it cost?" $240. It's a standard unit, same manufacturer as the tower system." He pulled out a small notebook, wrote something in it, put it back in his pocket. "I'll get you the authorization this afternoon," he said. "I'll order it before end of business." He nodded, turned to leave, stopped. "Quinn?" She looked up. "What Holt said. Are you staying?" "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because everyone who spent more than 10 minutes actually looking at what you do here would be an idiot not to ask." He said it plainly, without flattery in it, the way a person states a logistical reality. "That's all." She said nothing. He left. Kane returned on Thursday. Not to the range. He was restricted from operational duties pending the inquiry outcome, but to his office in the range operations building, where he had apparently been authorized to retrieve personal items. He went in the morning when the cadre was on the range and the building was mostly empty, which Mara suspected was intentional. She saw him through the equipment bay window, walking across the parking area with a box under his arm, moving carefully. The way people move when they're in a place they're not sure is still theirs. She almost left it there. Then she went out. "Commander?" He stopped, turned. He looked like a man who had not slept in several days, which he probably hadn't. There was something stripped from his face that had been there before. Not the arrogance, she didn't think, or not only that, but the certainty. The complete internal confidence that he'd always been right and always would be. "Quinn," he said. They stood in the parking area in the morning wind, the dust moving between them, the mountains blue and still at the horizon. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, "before you answer whatever the admiral asked you, and before Holt closes his file." He set the box down on the hood of a vehicle. The shot, the first one, the lane 14 shot. He looked at her directly, and whatever else had been stripped from him over the past week, the directness was still there. "Was it deliberate? Getting caught, I mean. You left the gate open. You staged in a lane where the scoring terminal was visible from the active range. You fired during a period when the range was staffed, and anyone could have seen the terminal light up. Mara looked at him. Was any of that accidental? He said. The question was good. It was a good question from a man who was smarter than his behavior over the past weeks had suggested, and who was now in this stripped-down version of himself capable of asking it. She considered lying. Not seriously. She dismissed it in about 2 seconds, but she considered it. No, she said, it wasn't accidental. He absorbed that. Why? Because I needed the program to be evaluated, and I needed the evaluation to come from a real incident, not a complaint. Complaints get managed. Incidents produce data. She paused. I didn't plan your specific response, but I planned the conditions under which some kind of response would occur. So I did exactly what you expected. You did one version of what was possible. She looked at the box on the hood. There were other versions. He was quiet for a moment. Was I the target? Specifically? The conduct was the target. You were the one who chose to produce it. He looked away, at the range, at the mountains. A long exhale. I built this program, he said. It wasn't defensive. It was something else, a statement of fact that also carried grief in it. The grief of a person watching something they made become something they didn't intend. I know you did, Mara said. The marksmanship curriculum is exceptional, genuinely. What you built here in terms of technical instruction is worth keeping. He looked at her. He was waiting for the rest of it, and she gave it to him. The culture you built around it needs to change, she said, and you're the person who has to decide whether you're part of that or not. The words landed. She could see them land. He picked up the box. What are you going to tell the admiral? He said. Mara looked at the range, at the empty lanes in the morning light, at the wind flags, the ones she'd replaced in her second week because 3 of them had torn loose and nobody had filed the requisition for new ones, turning slowly in the shift off the northern ridge. I don't know yet, she said. It was the truth. He nodded. Once. Walked to his vehicle, set the box in the passenger seat. Before he got in, he looked back at her across the parking lot, across the distance and the dust, and he said something she wasn't entirely sure she was meant to hear. For what it's worth, he said. I didn't hear you coming. She watched the vehicle pull out of the lot. She stood in the parking area for a long moment. Then she went back inside, to the equipment bay, to the desk and the manifest and the second folding chair that had been occupied more often in the past week than in all the weeks before it combined. She sat down. She looked at the business card on the corner of the desk, the one with the department designation that meant nothing unless you knew what it meant. She turned it over, looked at the 2 words on the back. Ridgeline Protocol. She had heard those words before. Once, 4 years ago, in a classified briefing in a room she was not supposed to have been in, attached to a program that officially did not exist, referencing an operation that had been tabled indefinitely for reasons that had been given as logistical and that she had understood at the time to be political. Indefinitely was apparently over. She picked up her secure phone, dialed. 1 ring, 2. Holt, said the voice on the other end. You said to call when I was ready, Mara said. A pause. Brief. The sound of a chair moving somewhere, a door closing. Are you? He said. She looked at the equipment bay, at the shelving unit she'd organized, the spotting scopes she'd recalibrated, the cleaning kits in their proper order, the window that looked out on the range where a trainee was running 600-meter transitions alone in the morning light, at the faded uniform hanging on the hook near the door. Tell me about Ridgeline Protocol, she said. Holt told her about Ridgeline Protocol, the way people tell things they've been waiting to tell, carefully at first, then faster once the framework was established, and the listener had demonstrated they could hold what was being handed to them. The short version was this. 3 years ago, a classified long-range interdiction program operating in a theater that didn't officially involve American personnel had gone dark. Not in the way operations went dark when they were successful, quietly, cleanly, wrapped and filed, but in the way they went dark when something had broken at the seam between the operation and the people managing it from a distance. Personnel unaccounted for. Evidence of internal compromise. A chain of command that had somewhere in its middle developed a fracture that nobody had caught until the fracture had become a collapse. The long version involved names Mara already knew, locations she had been in, and one specific event that she had been told was resolved. And that was, Holt said in a tone stripped of diplomatic softening, not resolved. "Who's running the inquiry?" she said. "Joint, DOD, and Federal. Small team, compartmented." "How small?" 5 people with full access, 8 with partial." A pause. "We need a 6th with full access who has direct operational knowledge of the original program." Mara was quiet. "You were in Ridgeline for 2 years, Holt said. You were the primary shooter on 4 of the 7 documented engagements. You know the personnel, the protocol structure, the methodology. There is no one else who has that combination and is also alive," she said. The pause on Holt's end was brief but present. "Currently accessible," he said. She looked at the business card on the desk, at the window, at Briggs on the range, still working his 600-meter transitions in the morning light, still refusing to quit on the problem. "I need 48 hours," she said. "You have 24. Then I need 24. Quinn." "I heard you, Holt. 24 hours. She hung up. The next 24 hours were not restful. She didn't sleep much. 2 hours, maybe 3, in broken intervals that felt more like controlled unconsciousness than actual rest. She spent the night going through what she remembered, which was more than she wanted and less than she needed. The specific texture of a memory set that had been deliberately compartmented for 3 years and was now being asked to reopen. Ridgeline had begun as a support program. Sniper capability augmentation for Allied Special Operations Forces in a region where American direct involvement was politically impossible and operationally necessary. The theory was clean: embed American precision shooters in advisory roles, provide capability, maintain deniability. The practice was considerably less clean, because the practice involved actual human beings in actual dangerous environments, making actual decisions with actual consequences. And the chain of command managing those decisions from air-conditioned offices several time zones away had a limited appetite for the complexity that generated. Mara had been part of Ridgeline for 26 months. She had made 4 confirmed long-range engagements. She had also, during that period, identified what she believed at the time was a pattern of information leakage. Small things, individually explainable, that collectively suggested someone in the program's administrative structure was sharing operational data with parties who should not have had it. She had reported it. The report had been received, acknowledged, and filed. 6 weeks later, she had been extracted from the program, debriefed under conditions that she had found at the time unusual and found in retrospect deeply alarming, and informed that her operational status was being reclassified for security reasons that were not explained in detail. 2 months after that, she had been officially declared operationally deceased. She had not argued. She had gone to ground, waited, and watched, and spent 3 years and 11 months doing the specific things that a person who is officially dead can do, that a person who is officially alive cannot. Moving without a footprint, watching without being watched, learning the shape of a problem from the outside, while the people inside it convinced themselves the problem had been solved. The problem had not been solved. That was what Holt had told her. And the reason he had told her now, in this base, in this week, was that whatever was moving inside Ridgeline Protocol had started moving faster. Something had changed, an inquiry, an intercept, a piece of documentary evidence that had surfaced from a direction nobody expected. And the window for addressing it with a contained team was closing. She needed to decide whether she was going back in. At 0400, she stopped trying to sleep and went to the range. Not to shoot. She didn't need a target for what she was doing. She walked the range in the dark, which was legal. She had a legitimate reason to be there, maintenance authority, access to the space, and she walked the full length of it, from the firing line to the mid-range berm to the far end where the target stood empty and still in the darkness. She stood at the 1,547-meter mark and looked back at the firing line, a mile, give or take. From here, the prep bay was a small structure at the far end of a long darkness. The lights of the base were visible beyond it, amber and distant. Everything between here and there was empty ground and wind and the sound of the high desert at night, which was not silence but close to it. Insects, the structural sounds of the target mechanism settling in the cold, the occasional shift of the wind through the flags. She stood there for a while. The thing about a mile is that it's not a long distance in most contexts. You can walk it in 20 minutes, you can drive it in less than 2. But from the shooting end, looking back at a target the size of a dinner plate, it becomes a different kind of distance. It becomes everything that can go wrong in the space between decision and consequence. Every variable, every miscalculation, every moment where something moves or shifts or changes in the half second between the trigger and the impact. She knew, standing there, what she was going to tell Holt. She'd known it since the night before. She'd spent the dark hours not deciding, but rather finishing the process of arriving at a decision she'd started the moment she took the equipment posting at Blackstone. Or before that, maybe, the moment she'd read the first piece of intelligence that suggested Ridgeline's compromised data was still active, still being used, still producing outcomes in places, and for people who should never have had access to it. She had come here because it was close to the source. She was going back in because the source needed to be found. The question that remained was what she was going to do about the admiral's offer before she did. She called him at 0600, which was early even for a flag officer, but not, in her experience, for this one. He answered on the second ring. "Quinn, I'm going to take the position," she said. A pause. "Holt talked to you." "He did." "And? I'll take the Blackstone posting as my official cover assignment. Instructor billet, curriculum development, whatever the formal designation needs to be. But I need it structured so that I can move when I need to move without triggering a reporting chain." The admiral was quiet for a moment. "You understand that creates administrative complexity." "You've managed administrative complexity before." "Yes." Another pause. "Ridgeline." "Yes." "Quinn, if you go back into that, I know what I'm going back into." "I was going to say," he said, with the particular tone of a man who had been interrupted and was determined to finish the sentence, "that if you go back into that, I want a check-in protocol. Not optional, not discretionary. A real one. Scheduled, encrypted, regular enough to matter." She had not expected that. She was quiet for a moment. "Weekly," she said. "Twice weekly. Every 5 days." "Done," he said. Came out so fast she understood he'd been ready to negotiate and had not expected to win as much as he had. "I'll have the billet authorization process through the weekend. Your official start date will be Monday. In the meantime, I'm still on the equipment manifest," she said. "There are 3 spotting scopes that need depot-level service and a target motor on lane 12 that I haven't gotten to yet." A sound on the admiral's end that might, in a person with a looser sense of professional bearing, have been a laugh. "Yes, Master Chief," he said. Bon. Thursday came in loud. Not meteorologically. The weather had settled into the flat, pressing heat of a high desert afternoon that expected nothing from anyone. The noise was institutional, the specific noise of a facility that had been operating under a suspended state for 3 days, and was now, with the quiet departure of Holt's vehicle at 0900, beginning to recalibrate towards something like normality. The inquiry was not closed. Holt had made that clear in his departure brief to the base commander, but the findings were complete, but the documentation was ongoing. The administrative outcomes would be communicated through official channels, and the base should expect formal notification within 10 to 15 business days. What he did not say, but what was understood by anyone paying attention to what he left behind rather than what he took with him, was that the operational consequences for certain members of the instructor cadre would be significant. Kane was still restricted from the range. He was present on base. His vehicle was in the lot. But he was not a visible presence, and in the way of places with clear social hierarchies, his invisibility had a quality to it that was different from Mara's. Hers had been the invisibility of being overlooked. His was the invisibility of someone who understood that being seen was currently a liability. Owens ran Thursday's training sessions. The trainees ran a full schedule, 4 range evolutions, plus a classroom block in the afternoon on atmospheric effects and their interaction with long-range ballistics. The classroom block was normally Kane's domain, one of the lectures he'd developed over years and delivered from memory with the confidence of a man who had taught the same material enough times that it had become part of his thinking rather than something he thought about. Owens taught it from Kane's notes, which was harder, and the trainees could tell it was harder, but they responded to it with a particular attentiveness that Mara, watching through the window of the range operations building, understood to be something other than politeness. They were paying attention because the situation had made them aware that attention was the minimum they owed. After the classroom block, Owens appeared in the equipment bay doorway. "They want to know if you'd come to the evening debrief," he said. She looked up. "The trainees?" Briggs asked. A few others agreed. He paused. "It's informal, not a formal session, just the group." She looked at the inventory manifest, at the Lane 12 motor repair she hadn't completed. "What time?" she said. The common room held all 14 trainees, which was more people than the space was designed to comfortably accommodate. So some of them were on the floor, and 2 were standing near the coffee machine, and Calloway had somehow acquired a second chair from somewhere and was sitting on it backward with his arms across the back. Mara sat in one of the plastic chairs near the window. Nobody had prepared an agenda. That became clear in the first 30 seconds, when there was a brief, collective pause of the kind that happens when everyone has agreed to a thing, but nobody has determined who goes first. Devereaux went first. "I've been in the Army for 8 years, he said. "I've been in this program for 7 weeks, and I've never seen what I saw on Station 7. He said it like a statement of fact, not a compliment, the plain narration of a thing that had happened. "What I want to understand is the mechanics of the last shot. The carrier shift anticipation, how you learn to read that." Mara looked at him. "Which part specifically?" "The sound identification. You said the hydraulic motor had a half-second lag between the randomization trigger and the physical direction change. How did you isolate that from the rest of the ambient noise?" "Pattern separation. The motor had a specific pitch change at the trigger moment. It's a load shift. The system draws more current from the motor right before the physical change executes. If you know what you're listening for, you can feel it before you hear it." "How long did it take you to identify that pattern?" "In this system, about 4 exposures. 4 times hearing it." "Yes." The room processed that. 4, Devereaux said. "The system has a limited range of hydraulic characteristics. Once you have the baseline pitch, the variance is small enough to isolate. It's not a difficult pattern, it's just one most people don't know to look for." Briggs said, "What do you listen for when the system isn't a mechanical one, in a real environment?" The room shifted slightly, not in posture, in something more atmospheric. The nature of the question changed what kind of conversation this was. Mara looked at him. "What kind of real environment?" "Any. Open terrain, urban, somewhere with a lot of ambient noise." "You're asking about live fire environments?" "Yes." She considered the question for a moment. Not whether to answer, but how much of the answer was useful to people at their stage of development versus how much would be information without a framework to place it in. "In a live environment," she said, "you're not listening for mechanics. You're listening for pattern breaks. Anything that doesn't fit the ambient baseline. A change in bird behavior, a vehicle that starts and doesn't move, a person who is in a position that doesn't match their apparent purpose." She paused. "The mechanical read is a shortcut. You learn the system, you exploit the system's tells. In a real environment, the system is a person, and people are less consistent than hydraulics, but more readable in other ways." "More readable how?" Calloway said. "Because they want things. The system doesn't want anything. It just executes its programming. People want to survive or to succeed or to not be seen. Those wants produce behaviors that are predictable if you know what the want is." She looked at him. "The hard part isn't identifying the pattern. The hard part is staying detached enough to read it while everything else is happening around you." "How do you stay detached?" Calloway said. She thought about how to answer that accurately. "You don't," she said. "You stop trying to stay detached and you learn to function with attachment. The detachment model is a training fiction. It tells you that good operators are emotionally neutral. They're not. Good operators have feelings, and they've learned to let the feelings exist without letting them drive." She paused. "That's a different skill from detachment, and it's considerably harder to develop." The room was quiet. Briggs said, "Is that something that can be taught?" "Most things can be taught. Some things take longer than a training cycle." "But some things take specific experiences," Devereaux said. It wasn't a challenge. It was an observation with weight in it. Some things you can only learn by being in them. Yes, Mara said. That's true. Nobody filled the silence that followed. Outside, the wind moved across the corrugated roof of the barracks. The way you handled Kane, Briggs said, not accusatorially, carefully. You could have stopped it earlier, lane 14, if you'd identified yourself. I didn't identify myself for the same reason you don't start a target engagement by announcing your position, she said. Information is leverage. You release it when the release produces the outcome you need. And the outcome you needed was the inquiry, she said. A documented record of the conduct, not just my word against a commander's, an incident with witnesses, with scoring data, with a formal evaluation that was run outside its authorized parameters. She looked at him directly. One person reporting a culture problem gets a meeting. An event with a paper trail gets an investigation. Briggs absorbed that. He stopped. Started over. That's a different way of thinking about it than I had. Most people don't think about institutional leverage because most people aren't thinking about changing institutions, she said. They're thinking about surviving them. The room sat with that for a long time. She went back to the equipment bay at 2100 and finished the lane 12 motor repair, which required her to partially disassemble the traverse mechanism and replace a worn drive gear that had been causing intermittent tracking errors. She had the parts because she had ordered them in her first week, when the maintenance log had first told her the motor was failing, 6 weeks before it would have become a range-stopping problem. The repair took an hour and 40 minutes. She logged it in the maintenance record, noted the parts used, and closed the log. Then she sat at the desk and wrote 2 things. The first was a message to Holt, encrypted, brief. I'm in, ready to receive the full package when the authorization is processed. The second took longer. She sat with it for 20 minutes before she started writing, and another 20 after she'd written it, reading it back and making changes that were small but not minor. The difference between saying something accurately and saying it in a way that landed correctly. It was addressed to Admiral Travis Mullen. The substance of it was this. She would take the instructor posting. She would develop the curriculum revision that had been discussed. She would run the check-in protocol he'd requested. She would do all of those things with the same care she'd brought to the equipment manifest, and the spotting scope calibrations, and the wind monitoring note, and the lane 12 motor repair. But she needed him to understand something first. The program at Blackstone was worth saving. She had been skeptical going in, and she was no longer skeptical. The trainees she had spent the past week observing were not the problem. They were, most of them, exactly the kind of people that programs like this existed to develop. They were young and hungry and capable of being better than they currently were, and all they required was the kind of instruction that matched the quality of the technical training with a proportional investment in the character formation that made technical training mean something. The culture problem was real. The leadership failure was documented. Those things needed to be addressed at the structural level, which was Holt's domain. But the program itself, the shooting, the data work, the atmospheric reading, the discipline of learning to put around where you intended it to go, under conditions that were designed to prevent you from doing exactly that, that was worth something. It was worth the 6 weeks she'd spent in a warehouse that smelled like gun oil. It was worth more than that. She was going to make sure it came out on the other side. She sent the message. Then she put the phone down, turned off the desk lamp, and went to sleep. The morning that changed everything came on Friday. It came early, 0422, by the timestamp on the encrypted notification that hit her secure phone, and it came in the form of a code that she had not seen in 4 years, formatted in a protocol that officially didn't exist, routing through a relay system that was so compartmented that even knowing the relay existed required a clearance she had held for a decade. It was a ridgeline contact signal. Not from Holt, not from anyone in the current inquiry team, from inside the program. She sat up on her bunk in the dark equipment bay and looked at the phone screen for a long moment without moving. The signal carried a short data string, an authentication code, a location indicator, and a status flag. She ran the authentication against the protocol keys she still had committed to memory, because some things you didn't write down, and verified it in under 60 seconds. The location indicator placed the origin somewhere in the southwest, which was broad enough to be nearly useless in isolation, but specific enough in combination with the routing signature to narrow it to one of 3 locations she knew from the original program. The status flag said active hostile. Requesting extraction contact. She got dressed. She called Holt at 0431. He answered immediately, which told her he had been awake, which told her he had been waiting for something. Whether this specific thing or something adjacent to it, she couldn't tell. I got a contact signal, she said. A silence that was not surprise. Something more complicated. When? He said. 9 minutes ago. Authentication? Verified against the original keys. It's real. Another silence. Longer. Holt, she said. I'm here. The sound of him moving. A chair. A door. Quinn, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm listening. The contact signal. If it's coming from who I think it's coming from, this is not a straightforward extraction situation. The person sending it is not someone you were expecting to hear from. I wasn't expecting to hear from anyone. The program was supposedly dark. Yes, it was dark. It should have stayed dark. He paused. There's a component of the full Ridgeline package I haven't given you yet. I was going to provide it when the authorization processed. The timing is... He stopped. The person sending that signal was not a field operative. She waited. They were in the administrative chain, Holt said. Upper level. The person I believe this is coming from had access to program architecture, personnel files, and operational sequencing for the full 7-engagement timeline. The implications of that settled through her like cold water. An administrative contact with full program architecture access, sending a distress signal through an active hostile flag, from a location inside the Southwest region where 2 of the original program's support nodes had operated. They were inside the leak, she said. I believe so, Holt said. As a target or a participant, I can't tell you yet. That's part of what we haven't been able to determine. What's the name? A pause. Quinn? Holt. The name. He said it. Mara sat with that name in the dark equipment bay for 3 full seconds, which was long enough for a lot of things to move through her in a specific order. Recognition first, then the particular quality of shock that comes not from surprise but from confirmation. The moment when something you suspected but had not allowed yourself to fully form becomes real and solid and impossible to unknow. She knew the name. She knew it because she had worked alongside the person for 14 months. Because she had trusted the person with information that she had trusted no one else with. Because the person had been the one who received her initial leak report, the report about the compromised data, the pattern of small indicators that something was wrong at the seam between the field and the administrative structure. The person who had received her report, filed it, done nothing. How long have you known? She said. Her voice was level. She was aware of keeping it level the way you are aware of something physical, a balance you're maintaining with effort. We've had the name as a probability for 11 weeks, Holt said. Confirmed as a certainty 4 days ago. 4 days ago. He had arrived at Blackstone 4 days ago. That's why you came here, she said. It wasn't only about the Kane situation. The Kane situation was real and needed to be addressed. But yes, there was a secondary reason. He paused. I needed to brief you in person. I needed to assess whether you were operational before I handed you something this. You assessed me, she said flatly. Yes. The line was quiet. She did not say what she was thinking, which was several things simultaneously and none of them simple. And all of them would have to wait until the situation was resolved because there was no version of this where what she was thinking took priority over what needed to be done. What does the extraction contact require? She said. A response to the signal first. Then I need to route it through the inquiry team for authorization. That's going to take... How long? 4 hours minimum. 6 more likely. I don't think we have 6 hours, she said. The active hostile flag means someone in the signal sender's environment is aware enough to make them dangerous. They're either being watched or they're about to be. Quinn, I can't authorize an unilateral. I'm not asking you to authorize anything. I'm telling you the timeline. She stood up from the bunk, started moving toward the equipment locker she'd maintained in the back of the bay since her first week. Not because she thought she would need it here, specifically, but because she had long ago stopped going anywhere without maintaining the ability to need it. 6 hours from now, whoever holds that signal sender has had time to respond to the signal being sent. That window closes. I need 2. That's not Holt. She stopped moving. You told me you read the file. All of it. Yes. Then you know that I have successfully executed 4 classified long-range engagements, 3 unconventional extractions, and 1 operation that is documented in a report that the Congressional Oversight Committee has not been allowed to read. She paused. You assessed me for 3 days in a training base in the high desert. I know what your assessment says, and you know that what I'm about to do is the correct call. Silence on the line. 2 hours, he said. Not a minute passed. And I want a radio channel. You'll have one. Quinn. What? The name I gave you, he said. When you find them, whatever state they're in, I need them functional. Do you understand what I'm saying? She understood. The signal sender was not a target. Whatever else they were, whatever role they had played in the compromise by choice or by circumstance, they were also the only person who had survived long enough inside Ridgeline's broken structure to be able to tell the inquiry what it needed to know. I understand, she said. She ended the call. She opened the equipment locker. Inside, behind the legitimate maintenance gear, behind the spare parts and the calibration tools and the stack of technical manuals she had accumulated over 6 weeks of doing a job nobody had been doing properly before she arrived, was the other set of equipment. The set she had not inventoried on any manifest. The set that had come with her in the duffel bag when she drove through the Blackstone gate in the rain 6 weeks ago and stood at the intake desk while a specialist named Dooley slid her paperwork back without stamping it. She had not needed it until now. She took out what she needed. She moved to the door of the equipment bay, paused, and looked back once at the desk, at the maintenance logs, the inventory manifest, the second folding chair, at the computer that ran the obsolete operating system and the note that said, "Do not touch the fiber cable," at the spotting scopes, properly calibrated, at the wind flags visible through the window, turning slowly in the dark. She had fixed what she could fix here. What she couldn't fix had just sent her a signal from somewhere in the southwest, through a protocol that officially didn't exist, using an authentication code that only someone who had been inside the original program would know. She had 2 hours. She went out into the dark. Owens found the equipment bay empty at 0600 when he came looking for the atmospheric data she'd been logging each morning. The maintenance log on the desk was open to the most recent entry. The Lane 12 motor repair, logged at 2340 hours the previous night, parts notation complete, everything in order. Below it, in the same handwriting, a single additional line. It was not a formal log entry. It had no category header, no job number, no maintenance code. It said, "Wind flags on lanes 9 to 11 need replacement. Parts are in the lower shelf, bin 3. Install before the 0800 session." Q. Owen stood in the empty equipment bay for a moment. He looked at the note, at the desk, at the second folding chair. He picked up his radio. "Range operations, this is Owens. Who do I call if I need to reach Master Chief Quinn?" A pause on the other end. "Sergeant, we don't have a Master Chief Quinn in the—" "I know," he said. "Who do I call?" Another pause. Longer. "I'll have to route that up, Sergeant. Stand by." He stood by. He had a feeling, standing in the bay that smelled like gun oil and organized intention, that he was going to be standing by for a while. And that whatever was happening out there, out in the southwest desert, in the dark, in the 2-hour window that he did not know existed and would not be told about, it was the thing that everything else had been preparation for. He went to the lower shelf, found bin 3, pulled out the wind flags. He installed them before the 0800 session because someone had asked him to, and because it was the right thing to do, and because the range needed to run correctly regardless of who was currently in the equipment bay. The morning light came in long and flat off the eastern ridge. The flags turned in the new wind. The drive took 91 minutes. She pushed the government pool truck she'd signed out the previous week for maintenance runs. Technically still in her possession, technically still on the equipment manifest. Across 2-lane highway and then off it onto a dirt service road that she knew from satellite imagery she had not been authorized to access, and had accessed anyway, 6 weeks ago, when she was in the process of deciding whether Blackstone was the right place to wait. The southwest desert at 0500 had its own particular quality of darkness. Not absolute, never quite absolute. Because the sky out here was too wide and too clear for real darkness, and the stars did something to the horizon that made distance impossible to judge accurately. She drove without headlights for the last 4 miles, which was not safe and also was, in the specific calculus she was operating in, the only correct choice. She parked behind a rock formation that her map said was called something she couldn't remember, and that the locals, if there had been locals anywhere near here, would have called something else. She got out. She listened. Wind. Insects. A vehicle, somewhere distant, moving away. Moving away was better than moving toward. She checked the radio on her vest. The channel Holt had specified. The encryption set. The transmit button where her left thumb could reach it without looking. She checked the sidearm. She checked the time. 0547. 1 hour and 13 minutes remaining in the window she had told Holt she needed. She moved toward the structure. It was not much of a structure. A maintenance relay station, decommissioned, one of several that had been built during a telecommunications expansion 2 decades ago and abandoned when the technology changed. Concrete block, flat roof, 2 rooms, no power. The kind of place that appeared on property records as belonging to a utility company that had been dissolved and whose assets had been absorbed by a holding company that nobody looked at closely. The kind of place Ridgeline had used occasionally for things that needed to happen in a location that existed on no one's operational map. She cleared the perimeter first. It took 11 minutes and produced nothing. No contacts, no vehicles nearby, no evidence of recent approach from any direction except her own, and 1 set of tracks from the east that were at least 12 hours old by the disturbance pattern of the soil. The door was unlocked. She went in. The woman inside was sitting on the floor in the far corner of the first room, which was the only tactically reasonable position in the space, back against the wall, sight line to both the door and the single window. Something in her right hand that she raised and then lowered when the door opened and the silhouette in the doorway had the wrong shape to be a threat. Her name was Diane Rourke. She was 53 years old. She had spent 22 of those years in government service, 12 of them in positions that didn't appear on any public roster. She was the administrative director of Ridgeline Protocol for its entire operational period, which meant she had controlled personnel files, budget routing, communication channels, and the chain of reporting that connected the field operatives to the oversight structure. She looked like someone who had not slept in several days and had not eaten properly in longer than that. She had a cut above her left ear that had been closed with what appeared to be a strip of duct tape, which was not a medical solution to anything but was better than leaving it open. She stared at Mara from across the dark room. "Quinn," she said. "Rourke." A long silence. "You actually came," Rourke said. "You sent the signal. I sent it 2 weeks ago. Different relay. I wasn't sure it got through." "It didn't. This one did." Mara moved to the window, checked the exterior, moved back. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "How mobile?" Truthfully, Rourke pushed herself upright along the wall. Her left leg took her weight with visible resistance, not complete failure, a strain or partial tear, not structural damage. She favored it with the body knowledge of someone who had been managing it for a while and had calibrated their movement accordingly. "Functional," she said. "Slow. We have time." Mara looked at her. "Before we move, I need to ask you something." Rourke looked back at her with the expression of someone who had been expecting this specific question and had been dreading it, and had decided somewhere in the past several days of sitting on a concrete floor that she was going to answer it honestly, regardless of what it cost. "Ask," she said. "My leak report. 4 years ago. You received it." "Yes." "What did you do with it?" The room was quiet. Outside, nothing moved. "I filed it," Rourke said. "That's what happened to it. That's not what you did with it." Rourke looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "I was told to file it by someone above me who told me the concern had already been identified through other channels and was being handled at a level I didn't have visibility into." She paused. "I believed that." "For how long?" "Longer than I should have." Her jaw tightened. 18 months. I believed it for 18 months. And then I started seeing things that didn't fit, small things. Budget anomalies, personnel moves, communication routing that didn't match the official record. She looked at Mara directly. By the time I understood what was actually happening, I was in a position where surfacing that information through normal channels was not survivable. Because the normal channels were compromised, up to and including the person who told me your report had been handled. She said it flatly, without drama, in the voice of someone delivering an after-action report on a failure they had not entirely caused, but had not adequately prevented. Mara stood with that for a moment. "Who gave you the order to file it?" she said. Rourke told her. The name landed differently from the one Holt had given her. Holt's name had been a confirmation, something she had suspected, the final piece of a shape she'd been tracing for years. This name was something else. This was a name she hadn't had, a name that completed a different part of the picture, a structural piece that explained several things that had remained unexplained in Mara's private accounting of what had gone wrong and how and when. "Is that name in your documentation?" she said. "Everything I have is in here." Rourke lifted a padded envelope from behind her hip, where it had been wedged between her body and the wall. "It's not complete. There are gaps I couldn't fill without access to files I was cut off from. But it's enough." Mara looked at the envelope. "Let's move," she said. Well, getting Rourke to the truck took 34 minutes, which was longer than Mara would have preferred and faster than Rourke's legs strictly allowed. They moved in the specific rhythm of two people who had both been trained for movement under constraint. Not quickly, but correctly, minimizing exposure, maintaining awareness, stopping twice when the wind changed in ways that might have meant something, and turned out to mean only that the wind was changing. At the truck, Mara keyed the radio. "Holt." Static. Then, "Quinn, status. I have the contact, she's mobile. I'm 40 minutes from Blackstone." She paused. "She has documentation." A silence on Holt's end that she read accurately as the sound of several things being recalibrated at once. "Any contacts on your approach?" "Negative." "Any indication the location was being observed?" 12-hour-old tracks from the east. "Nothing active." She looked at Rourke, who was in the passenger seat with the envelope on her lap and her head back against the headrest in the way of someone using every moment of not moving to recover. "I need a medical assessment when we arrive. Her leg needs imaging." "I'll arrange it." A pause. "Quinn, the name she's carrying in that documentation, do you have it?" "One of them. Possibly two." Another silence. Longer. "All right," Holt said. "Bring her in." Oh, they arrived at Blackstone at 07:22. The base was alive by then. Morning formation done. Trainees headed to the range for the 0800 session. The smell of breakfast from the mess hall cutting through the desert air. The ordinary machinery of a training installation running its daily cycle with no awareness that 2 hours ago, in a decommissioned relay station 40 miles east, something had been recovered that was going to change the shape of several people's lives. Holt met them at the equipment bay. He had someone with him, a woman in civilian clothes who turned out to be a federal medical officer, which explained the bag she carried and the no-nonsense way she moved directly to Rourke without introduction. "Sit," the medical officer said. Rourke sat. Holt looked at Mara. She handed him the envelope. He took it without looking at it, looked at her instead. "Walk me through the approach," he said. She did. Precise, sequential, no editorializing. The drive time, the perimeter assessment, the interior entry, the contact. She described Rourke's condition as she had found it, the duct tape closure on the head wound, the leg mobility assessment, the exchange of relevant information before they moved. Holt listened without interrupting. He had the legal pad, but he didn't write on it. He was cataloging, not documenting, filing the account in the specific way that people filed things they intended to cross-reference carefully later. When she finished, he said, "She told you about the order to file your report?" "Yes." "And the name attached to that order?" "Yes." He looked at her face, at the absence of readable expression there. "Are you functional?" "I'm standing here talking to you." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. "I'm functional." He held the look for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then he nodded and opened the envelope. The medical officer determined that Rourke's leg had a partial tear in the lateral collateral ligament, which was painful and limiting but not requiring immediate surgical intervention. The head wound was superficial. She had mild dehydration and what the medical officer described as significant accumulated physical stress, which was a clinical phrase for having spent an indeterminate number of days in a concrete room under a level of psychological pressure that the body experienced as a sustained physical event. She was given fluids, a proper wound closure on the head cut, and something for the inflammation in the leg, and then she sat across from Holt at the table in the range operations building and told him everything she had told Mara, and considerably more. Mara sat in the corner. She was there because Holt wanted her there, because there were points in Rourke's account that required cross-referencing against Mara's direct operational knowledge, and because Holt was thorough enough to want the verification present in the room rather than consulted after the fact. What came out over the next 3 hours was not a clean story. It was the kind of account that clean stories are built from afterward, in summaries and reports and congressional briefings. The raw version before the editorializing, before the institutional need to produce a narrative that was graspable and assignable, and fit into a framework of cause and effect that made sense from the outside. The raw version was messier. The compromise inside Ridgeline had not been a single actor executing a clean betrayal for a clear motive. It had been a structure, several people at several levels, some of whom understood what they were part of, and some of whom understood only their piece of it, connected by a network of incentives and pressures and compromised positions that had developed over years and had become, by the time Mara was in the field, something so embedded in the program's operations that it had begun to look like the program itself. Rourke had not been a participant in the original compromise. She had been correct about that. What she had been was something adjacent and in some ways worse, a person who had the access and the authority to identify the problem, who had identified it, who had been redirected by someone she trusted, and who had then spent 18 months not looking closely enough at the reasons that redirect had felt necessary. I told myself it was above my clearance level, she said, that someone with more visibility was handling it. I believed that was possible because I wanted to believe it. She said the last sentence without softness. That's the truth of it. Holt wrote something. The operational data that was compromised, he said. Engagement sequencing, personnel files, was any of it used to produce outcomes in the field? Rourke looked at the table. Yes. How many? I've documented 3 confirmed, 2 probable. The room was very quiet. Mara was looking at the wall. She was aware of Holt not looking at her, which was a specific kind of awareness. The awareness of someone choosing not to direct attention toward a place where they knew the attention would land badly. 3 confirmed outcomes. She knew what outcomes meant in the context of a long-range interdiction program that had compromised operational data. The 4th engagement, she said. Her voice was level. She was keeping it level. Rourke looked at her. Yes. My 4th engagement. The target sequencing I received. Yes, Rourke said. I didn't know until afterward, but yes. The 4th engagement had been the one that went wrong. Not catastrophically. She had made the shot, completed the assignment, extracted without contact. But the intelligence that had generated the target had been wrong in a way that had only become apparent to her in the months afterward, when she was no longer in the program and no longer had access to the outcome reporting, and had spent a significant amount of time sitting with the specific discomfort of an operation she could not fully account for. Now she could account for it. The discomfort did not go away with the accounting, it changed form. The individual responsible for the sequencing compromise on that engagement, she said. Is that name in your documentation? It is, Rourke said. Is it the same name you gave me in the relay station or a different one? Different one. 3 names now. 3 distinct points in the structure. Holt set his pen down. He looked at Mara for a long moment. Take a break, he said. I'm fine. Quinn. I said I'm fine. I know what you said. He said it without aggression, without the management quality that people put in their voices when they were trying to handle someone. He said it the way a person said something to another person when they meant it plainly. Take 15 minutes. Get some water. Come back. She looked at him. She got up. She went outside. The range was running. She could hear it, the crack of rifles from the active lanes, the distant beep of scoring terminals, Owen's voice carrying on the wind from the firing line calling a correction to someone in lane 3. The ordinary sound of the place doing what it was built to do, indifferent to the things happening 40 meters away in the range operations building. She walked to the equipment bay. She stood at the desk. She looked at the maintenance log, at the second folding chair. She had known, at some level, that the fourth engagement was not clean. She had filed that knowledge in the category of things she could not resolve with available information and had continued functioning, which was the only rational response to uncertainty in an operational environment. You could not let uncertainty become paralysis. You cataloged it, you carried it, you waited for the information that would eventually clarify it. The information had now clarified it. What she was sitting with was not guilt. She had assessed the target intelligence using the best information available to her at the time, made the correct tactical decision based on that assessment, and executed the assignment. The corruption in the intelligence pipeline was not her failure. She knew that. What she was sitting with was something else. The knowledge that she had been used, that the system she had trusted, imperfectly, with the qualified trust of a person who understood that systems were never fully trustworthy, had used her to produce an outcome she would not have agreed to if she had known what the outcome actually was. That was not guilt. It was something harder to name and harder to set down. She stood at the desk for 11 minutes. Then she went back. The debrief resumed. Over the next 2 hours, Holt worked through the documentation Rourke had assembled, cross-referencing dates, personnel movements, communication routing, budget anomalies. He asked Mara to confirm or dispute specific operational details as they surfaced. She confirmed where she could, disputed twice, flagged 4 points where her information didn't match Rourke's, and where the discrepancy itself was informative. The shape of it emerged slowly, the way shapes emerge when you've been in the dark, and the light comes up gradually enough that you only realize the full image was there when you can finally see all of it at once. At 11:30, Holt set down the pen. He looked at both of them. "This is enough," he said. "This is enough to move on the 2 primary actors and the 3 supporting principles we've identified. It's not everything. There are gaps in the supporting documentation that the legal team will need to work around, but the core case is here." Rourke let out a breath. Not relief exactly. The particular release of a person who has been holding something up for a very long time and has been allowed to put it down. "What happens now?" she said. "The package goes to the Joint Inquiry Team today. From there it moves to the appropriate prosecution authority. The timeline on that," he paused, "is not going to be fast. I want to be honest with you about that. This is a complicated case with significant classification concerns, and the institutional resistance to surfacing this kind of internal compromise is real." He looked at her. "But it moves. I can promise you it moves." Rourke nodded. "And my status?" she said. "Witness and cooperating source. Full protection." He paused again. "You're going to need to stay accessible. That's the condition." "I understand." He looked at Mara. "Quinn." "Yes." "Your 4th engagement. The inquiry team is going to want your full account of the intelligence you received, your assessment process, the decision framework you used, all of it. I know. That means going on record with things that are classified at a level that the standard inquiry process doesn't easily accommodate. I know that too. Are you prepared to do that?" She looked at him. "I've been prepared to do that for 4 years. I was waiting for someone to open the file." Holt held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up the envelope. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Both of you stay accessible." He left. Mara and Rourke sat in the room. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had too much shared history for silence to be neutral. Too many points where their paths had crossed in ways that had produced consequences neither of them had fully controlled. Rourke said, "I should have acted on your report." "Yes," Mara said. "You should have." "I know saying that doesn't—" "No, it doesn't." She looked at her directly. "But you sent the signal. When you finally had the information and the means to move on it, you used them." She paused. "That's not nothing." Rourke looked at her hands. "It's not enough." "No," Mara agreed. "It's not. But it's what we have." Well, the afternoon brought Kane. Not to the range operations building. He didn't have authorization to be there while the inquiry was ongoing. He came to the equipment bay at 1400, which was where people had developed the habit of coming when they needed to find someone who mattered and didn't know which official channel to use. He knocked. Mara looked up from the maintenance log she'd returned to reflexively, the way people return to the thing they know how to do when everything around them is uncertain. "Commander," she said. He came in. He stood. He had the look of a man who had something to say and had organized it carefully and was now having to decide whether the organized version was the right one to deliver. "I heard there was a situation this morning," he said. "Off base." "Where did you hear that?" "Owens. Indirect. He noticed the truck was gone before 0500 and back before 0800. He's observant." "He is?" Kane looked at the desk. "At the maintenance log? At the second folding chair. Is it connected to why Holt is still here?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I'm not going to ask what it is." "Good. I wanted to—" He stopped. The organized version, apparently, was not the right one. He started over. "I've been doing some reading," he said. "The last few days. There are a few combat action citations in the database that are partially redacted but attributable to a Master Chief with call sign Phantom who was operating in an advisory capacity in a theater I can't name, in a period that matches your service record if I make some assumptions about the classified gaps." He paused. "I wasn't trying to investigate you. I was trying to understand what I didn't understand." And I understand more than I did." He looked at her. "I owe you a direct apology. Not the kind where I cite the pressure I was under or the way the situation looked from where I was standing. A plain one." Mara waited. "I treated you as a category instead of a person," he said. "I saw support staff in a faded uniform and I decided what that meant, before I had any information that should have led to that decision. And then when the information I had didn't fit the category, I constructed a situation designed to prove the category was correct instead of reconsidering the category." He said it evenly, the way someone delivers a self-assessment they've had to work to arrive at and are not going to dress up. "That was wrong. The Station 7 setup was wrong. The way the range week was conducted was wrong. I'm sorry." She looked at him for a moment. "Accepted," she said. He blinked. He had expected something more. "That's it?" he said. "What else do you want?" "I don't know. I thought you might—" "Kane." She set down the pen. "You've been on this range for 12 years. You built something that is genuinely worth building. You made a serious error in judgment, and you're being held accountable for it through the appropriate channel." She paused. "What I want is for you to take what happened here and make it into the thing that changes how you run a room for the rest of your career. That's worth more to me than anything else you could offer." He stood there for a moment. "Holt's findings," he said. "What are they going to recommend?" "I don't have access to that." "But you have a sense." She looked at him. "You're probably not going to be the lead instructor here going forward. I think you know that." She paused. "But there are other programs, other places where what you know technically is the most valuable thing in the room. Whether you get there depends on what you do from this point." He absorbed that. "The curriculum," he said. "You said it was worth keeping." "It is." "Then keep it," he said. "Whatever you're taking on here, use what's worth using." He said it without bitterness, which was harder than it sounded. "I built it. I know its weaknesses. If you want the internal notes, the development rationale, the parts I tried and scrapped, I'll give them to you." Mara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I want those." He nodded once, the clean nod of a decision made. He left.
Shut.
Briggs found her on the range at 1600, which had become the pattern. The end of the training day, the range emptied of the organized activity, the light going amber and long. He was not there to talk. He was there to shoot, the same 600-meter work he'd been doing each evening, and he set up at lane 4 with the methodical precision of someone who had internalized the process enough that it no longer required thinking about. She watched from the scoring section. He ran 10 repetitions at 500. Clean, consistent, the split time even. Then he moved to 600 without changing his rhythm, without the pause she'd identified as the cognitive hesitation, without giving the distance the weight that had been slowing him down. Shot, cycle, breathe. Shot, cycle, breathe. The hits were not all center. 3 of them were outside what a formal qualification would accept, which was honest. He was a trainee, not a finished product. And the metric she was watching was not accuracy, but consistency of process. The process was consistent. He finished the set, cleared the rifle, and looked back at the scoring section. "Better?" he said. "Marginally," she said. He almost smiled. High praise. Don't push it. She walked to the lane. Your left elbow is migrating on the reload. You're losing your support point and rebuilding it, which costs you a quarter second per cycle. He looked at his arm. I didn't notice that. That's why you have an observer. She demonstrated the position, the specific angle, the pressure point, the way the elbow needed to anchor against the mat rather than float above it. Try again. He ran 3 more. The split time dropped. There, she said. He looked at her. Are you staying? She had been asked this enough times by now that she knew it was not a casual question, not from Briggs. Yes, she said. I'm staying. He absorbed that, looked at the range, at the target, small and distant in the late afternoon light. What happened this morning? He said. You were gone before 05. The truck was out. Training requirement, she said. He looked at her sideways. He knew that was not an answer. Are you okay? He said. It was such a simple question, the kind that people asked automatically, that had been stripped of meaning by repetition, that landed mostly as filler between things that actually mattered. He was not asking it automatically. She thought about the concrete room at 0547, about Rourke on the floor with a duct tape wound closure and a padded envelope, about the 3 names that had come out of the morning and what they meant for the accounting she had been privately maintaining for 4 years. I will be, she said. It was the most accurate answer she had. He nodded. He didn't ask for more. He went back to his setup and ran the sequence again, elbow anchored, split time clean, the distance no longer a threshold but just a number on a board. She stood at the scoring terminal and watched him work. But Holt found her at 1800. He'd been on calls since the midday debrief. She'd heard his voice through the wall of the range operations building at intervals across the afternoon. Brief calls, sequential, the pacing of someone working through a list with disciplined urgency. He came to the range instead of the equipment bay, which told her he wanted the conversation out of the building. She met him at the berm. The package is submitted, he said. Joint Inquiry Team has it. The 2 primary actors are going to be contacted by federal investigators within 72 hours. Not arrested? Contacted. There are jurisdictional complexities. He paused. But the contact is the beginning of a process that ends in a very specific place. The team lead has seen the documentation. He's confident. How long? Full resolution, charges, prosecution, all of it. Could be 18 months. The immediate operational consequence? He paused. The 2 primary actors lose their access within 48 hours. The security clearances are flagged. That's the first thing. And the 4th engagement. He looked at her. The 4th engagement is part of the case file, he said carefully. The investigation will establish the intelligence corruption that generated the target sequencing. That finding, he paused again. Quinn. The finding will make clear that the shooter acted on corrupted intelligence in good faith. That's the determination. I know what the determination will be. Then what are you asking? She looked at the range, at the empty lanes, at the 1,547-meter mark on lane 14 barely visible in the fading light. I'm asking whether the person on the other end of that engagement is in the case file, she said. Whether there's a name. Whether I can know what I actually did. Holt was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. There's a name. It's in the file. He paused. You'll have access to it when the authorization processes. Probably 48 hours. She nodded. Are you going to be able to work here while that's pending? He said. Yes. You're sure? Holt. She looked at him directly. I've been carrying this for 4 years. I can carry it for 48 more hours. He held her gaze. Then he nodded. The Admiral's posting authorization came through this afternoon, he said. Official start date is Monday as planned. The cover structure is clean. Instructor billet, curriculum development, nothing that draws attention. He paused. And the check-in protocol is active. He set it up himself. I know, she said. He texted me about it. The Admiral texted you. He has a phone like everyone else. Holt looked like a man recalibrating a detail that didn't fit his mental picture. What did he say? Every 5 days. And to eat something. Holt was quiet for a moment. Sound advice, he said. He extended his hand. She shook it. Quinn, he said, for what it's worth, though, the way you handled this. The whole thing. Not just today, but the 6 weeks. The way you set it up, the way you executed, the way you managed the people around you without their knowing they were being managed. He paused. It's a specific skill set. I've seen a lot of people with pieces of it. I haven't seen many with all of it. She said nothing. That's not a compliment for its own sake, he said. It's a relevant observation. Ridgeline going forward, there's going to be a rebuild, a clean version of the program, the elements that were worth keeping restructured correctly. The inquiry team is going to recommend it. He looked at her steadily. Your name is going to come up in that context. She looked at him. One problem at a time, she said. He almost smiled. Yes, Master Chief, he said. He left. The sun went down behind the western ridge. Mara stood at the edge of the range in the cooling air and watched it go the way she'd been watching sunsets from this range for 6 weeks. The fast, total quality of it, the light there and then not, the temperature dropping through the floor, and the desert's abrupt nightly surrender. Behind her, the training installation settled into its evening rhythm, the sounds of a place that had been unsettled for a week and was beginning to find its footing again. Not back to what it was. Something was going to change here, structurally, in ways that hadn't been finalized yet and wouldn't be for weeks. But the rhythm was returning. She thought about Rourke, currently in the base medical section under the care of the federal medical officer, the padded envelope in Holt's possession, the 4 years of sustained, disciplined patience that had produced this morning's 40-mile drive in the dark. She thought about the 4th engagement. She thought about the name she would have in 48 hours. She thought about those wind flags on lanes 9 through 11, which Owens had installed before the 0800 session because she had left a note asking him to. The flags were turning in the evening wind. Even in the dark, she could see the movement, the pale fabric catching the last of the ambient light, turning, reading the conditions the way they were supposed to, telling the story of the air to anyone who knew how to read it. She turned and walked back toward Building 7. She had a curriculum to build and a maintenance log to close out and a check-in protocol to set up and 48 hours to wait for a name she'd been waiting 4 years to have. She had work to do. She went inside. The name came in 41 hours, not 48. It arrived on the secure phone at 0317 on a Saturday morning in a formatted document that required 2 authentication steps to open and that she read sitting on the edge of her bunk in the dark equipment bay with the phone screen the only light in the room. The document was 4 pages. The first 3 were the formal finding, the intelligence corruption assessment, the sequencing analysis, the chain of custody for the compromised data that had generated the target designation for her 4th Ridgeline engagement. The language was careful and institutional, and built its case with the slow, deliberate architecture of something that was going to be read by lawyers and oversight committees and people who would be looking for any gap in the logic. The 4th page had the name. She read it. She sat with it for a long time. The name belonged to a man she had never met in person. A mid-level intelligence official who had, the document explained, been receiving payments routed through a shell company registered in a jurisdiction that asked no questions, in exchange for providing target designation influence to a network whose interests were, to put it plainly, not American. The man had been doing this for 6 years. The 4th Ridgeline engagement had been one of 7 instances in which his corrupted input had shaped an operational outcome. He was not a soldier. He had never been in the field. He sat in an office and moved information from one place to another and collected money for doing it, and had, as far as the document could determine, not spent a significant amount of time thinking about what happened to the people on either end of the operations he influenced. That was the name. That was what she had been carrying. She sat in the dark for another 20 minutes, not thinking exactly, processing, in the way that the body sometimes processes things before the mind catches up. A physical settling of weight that had been distributed unevenly for years and was now being redistributed by the fact of knowing. It wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was something adjacent, the specific quality of clarity that comes when an ambiguity that has been living in you, eating at the edges of things, finally resolves into a fact. Facts were manageable. Facts could be placed and held and accounted for. Ambiguity was what wore you down over years. She put the phone on the desk. She lay back on the bunk. She slept until 0600, which was the first time in 4 years she had slept through the early morning hours without waking. Monday arrived with the formal posting authorization and a different uniform. Not dramatically different. Still operational dress, still functional, Still the kind of clothing built for use rather than appearance. But it had her name tape, and it had her rank, and it had the insignia that went with 22 years of service that had officially not existed for the last 4 of them. Master Chief Petty Officer. 2 anchors, an eagle, a star. She had not worn the rank device in 4 years. She had not missed it, exactly. The rank had always been less important to her than the work it enabled, but putting it on in front of the equipment bay mirror that morning produced a sensation she hadn't anticipated. Not pride, something quieter. The feeling of a thing being restored to its correct position, like resetting a bone that had been set wrong, and that you had gotten used to the misalignment without knowing how much the misalignment cost until it was corrected. She wore it out into the Monday morning and went to find Owens. He was already at the range. 0615 pre-session setup, checking the terminal function on each active lane with the methodical care of a man who had always done his job correctly and was doing it slightly more carefully than usual because he understood that the standards of the place were in a period of being reset, and he was not going to be found on the wrong side of that reset. He saw the uniform. He stopped at lane 3 with the terminal diagnostic tablet in his hand and looked at her for a moment. At the rank device. At the name tape. At the overall presentation of a person who was no longer occupying a position that required them to be invisible. "Master Chief," he said. "Owens." She came alongside him. "Walk me through the terminal diagnostics. I want to understand the system from the operator side." He blinked. "You want me to walk you through? I've read the technical manual. I want to hear how you actually run it." She paused. The difference between what the manual says and what the experienced operator does is usually where the real knowledge lives. He looked at her for another moment. Then something in his face settled, the last residue of the uncertain week releasing itself. And he turned to the terminal and started talking. She listened. She asked questions. She took out a small notebook and wrote things in it that were not in any manual. The formal program review convened on Wednesday. It was not a large gathering. The base commander, 2 members of his staff, Owens representing the instructor cadre, and Mara as the newly designated lead instructor and curriculum development authority, a title that had appeared on her posting documentation and that she had not chosen but had not objected to. Kane was not present. His formal administrative outcome had been communicated the previous Friday: removal from the lead instructor position, a written reprimand that would follow him in his record, mandatory leadership review, and reassignment to a role at a different installation where he would not hold direct supervisory authority over trainees until the review was complete. It was not career-ending. It was not comfortable. It was proportional to what had happened, which was the best that accountability could offer in the absence of malice. The conduct had been real. The consequences were real. And what Kane did with those consequences from this point would determine what the rest of his career looked like. Mara had submitted Kane's curriculum notes to the review package. She had organized them, identified the technically sound elements, flagged the developmental philosophy that had been good, and the implementation culture that had not been. The review package made the distinction clearly. The base commander read it. He looked at her. "You advocated for preserving the curriculum," he said, "even after everything." "The curriculum didn't do what was done," she said. "The person delivering it did. Those are separable." He held her gaze. "That's a charitable position." "It's an accurate one." She paused. "Charity and accuracy aren't always the same thing. In this case, they are." He nodded slowly. "What do you need to implement the revision?" "2 things," she said. "First, a supplemental curriculum component on leadership culture and bias in assessment, not a lecture series, an integrated element that runs parallel to the technical training throughout the cycle. Second, a formal observer program where trainees evaluate their own bias in the field assessment process. That's unconventional. The best programs are." He looked at his staff. One of them was making a note. The other was looking at Mara with the expression of someone recalculating something they had thought they already understood. "You'll have what you need," the base commander said. "Check." Rourke left Blackstone on Thursday. She was transported by Holt's team to a secure location, not a facility, a private residence in a city that Mara was given in confidence and would not repeat, where she would be accessible to the inquiry team while the case built toward its first formal action. The federal protection detail was small and professional, and Rourke had, By the time she left, the look of a person who had put down something very heavy and was still learning to walk without the weight of it. She found Mara in the equipment bay on the morning of her departure. "I want to say something," Rourke said. "All right, not an apology. I've already said that. Something different." She stood in the doorway in civilian clothes that someone on Holt's team had provided, her legs still managed carefully but bearing weight more evenly than it had on Saturday morning. "You spent 4 years in a holding pattern because of decisions I was part of. You gave up your name, your identity, your operational standing. You went to ground and you waited and you did it without... You didn't become bitter about it. Or if you did, you didn't let the bitterness run you." Mara looked at her. "How did you do that?" Rourke said. The question was genuine, not rhetorical, not the setup for something else. Mara thought about it honestly. "I found work that mattered," she said, "and I did it as well as I could do it, wherever I was." She paused. "The rest of it, the anger, the waiting, all of it, that was always going to be there. I didn't get rid of it. I just didn't let it be the most important thing in the room." Rourke was quiet. "That's what you were doing here," she said. "The inventory, the spotting scopes, all of it." "Somebody had to," Mara said. Rourke almost smiled. It was the first time Mara had seen anything close to it. "Take care of yourself, Quinn," she said. "You too," Mara said. "Heal the leg properly. Don't let them tell you physical therapy is optional." "Is that tactical advice?" "It's practical advice. There's a difference. Sometimes." Rourke left. The inquiry's first formal action came on a Friday, 17 days after Holt had walked out of Blackstone with Rourke's padded envelope. Mara heard about it the way she heard about most things related to the case, through Holt, in a brief, encrypted message that said what it needed to say and nothing more. Primary Actor 1, clearance suspended, federal contact made, administrative leave pending formal charges. Primary Actor 2, same, timeline proceeding. She read it in the equipment bay. She set the phone down. She went back to the curriculum document she was building, a 60-page framework for integrating the leadership culture component into the existing technical curriculum with specific session outlines, assessment rubrics, and an observer protocol that she had spent the better part of 2 weeks developing with Owen's input and the base commander's grudging but genuine engagement. She wrote for another 2 hours. The thing about the curriculum was that it was, in its own way, the same problem she had been working on for 6 weeks. The gap between technical excellence and the human framework that made technical excellence mean something. The marksmanship was real. The precision was real. The discipline required to put a round on target at a mile, under conditions designed to defeat you, was a genuine and significant achievement. But it was only worth what the person holding the rifle was worth. And that was the thing that couldn't be taught in a ballistics table or a data book or a wind call. That was the thing that had to be built over time, in culture, in the daily texture of how a program treated the people inside it and the people who existed at its margins and the moments when nobody was formally watching. She was building the curriculum for that. It was going to take longer than the marksmanship instruction. It was going to be harder to assess. Some of the people who went through it would not change in the ways she intended, because that was the nature of people. They were not targets, they didn't hold still, they had their own histories and resistances and the things that had happened to them before they arrived that shaped what they were capable of hearing. She wrote, anyway. 3 weeks into the official posting, Briggs shot his qualification score. The formal qualification was a timed, multi-distance evolution. Everything the training cycle had been building toward, every technical skill assessed in a sequence designed to produce maximum cognitive and physical load at the moment of execution. It was the evaluation that determined graduation standing, that followed a trainee in their record, that said in the compressed language of a number what 6 months of development had produced. Briggs shot a 94. It was the highest score in the cycle. Possibly, Owen said quietly to Mara after the scores posted, in the top 5 scores the range had recorded in the past 3 years. She looked at the score sheet for a moment. "He's going to want to talk to you," Owen said. "I know." "Are you going to let him thank you?" "I'm going to let him report his score," she said. "That's different." Owens made a sound that might have been a laugh, contained quickly. Briggs came to the equipment bay at 1600. He stood in the doorway, not with the tentative posture of his first visit, but with something more settled in him, The bearing of a person who had arrived somewhere they'd been working toward and was still absorbing the fact of having arrived. 94, he said. I saw, she said. I want to. He stopped, started over, the way he always did when the first version wasn't the right one. You told me the hesitation at 600 was a cognitive problem. I thought about that for 3 weeks before it started to change. I ran the distance every evening. I kept trying to understand why the distance felt different instead of just deciding it wasn't. And, she said, and eventually I ran out of reasons to treat it as special, he said. And then it wasn't. She looked at him. What are you going to do with it? She said. The score? The understanding. The thing you learned about how you learn. She set the pen down. The score is a number. It tells you where you were on one day in one set of conditions. What happens to it depends on what you build on top of it. He thought about that. I want to be the kind of instructor you are, he said. Eventually, when I've got enough experience to be worth listening to. He said it plainly, without performance, not flattery, a statement of direction. Is that something you can help with? She looked at him for a long moment. Come find me in 2 years, she said. Do the work between now and then, and come find me. He nodded. It was the nod of a person making a commitment they intended to keep. Yes, ma'am, he said. He left. She went back to the curriculum. The second primary actor was formally charged on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after Holt had driven out of Blackstone. Mara read about it not through Holt, but through the encrypted news wire she had maintained access to since before she went dark. A government feed that reported on things that didn't make the public news cycle and that had, that Tuesday, a brief entry about a mid-level intelligence official placed on administrative leave pending federal investigation into unauthorized disclosure of classified operational data. No name. Operational security. She knew the name. She read the entry once. Closed the feed. She sat at the desk in the equipment bay for a moment. Not long, 2 or 3 minutes. And then she stood up and walked out to the range where the morning session was running, where Owens was walking the firing line and the trainees were working a distance progression and the wind flags on lanes 9 through 11 were turning in the morning air. She watched the session. She made 2 notes in the curriculum notebook. One was a technical observation about the way the distance progression sequencing interacted with the cognitive load of the wind adjustment, something she wanted to integrate into the observer protocol. The other was not technical, it was a single line. The work continues past the moment of resolution. That's not a failure. That's the nature of work that matters. She didn't know if it would go in the curriculum. Maybe not. Maybe it was only for her. She put the notebook away and went to join Owens on the line. The admiral came back to Blackstone on a Thursday in the 5th week of her official posting. Not in the staff car, in a regular vehicle with a driver, no announcement, no formal ceremony of arrival. He walked across the parking area in the morning light in his working uniform and found her in the equipment bay where she was reviewing the revised terminal calibration protocol with 2 of the range staff. He waited. She finished the review, sent the range staff to implement it, and turned. Admiral? Master Chief. He looked around the bay. It looked different from the last time he'd been in it. The same space, the same shelving, but organized with a purpose that was visible in the arrangement of things, the way the space had been made to work correctly. You've been busy. I had a backlog to clear. He almost smiled. I read the curriculum framework. And? It's excellent, genuinely. He sat in the second folding chair without being invited, which was the kind of thing he did that she had always appreciated. The refusal to perform formality when it wasn't serving anything. The observer protocol is going to take some institutional resistance to implement fully. The assessment rubric is going to make certain people uncomfortable. Things that make certain people uncomfortable often do. Yes, he looked at her. The Ridgeline rebuild proposal has been formally submitted. The inquiry team's recommendation went up last week. It's going to take 6 months to move through the authorization process and another year to implement. He paused. Your name is in the proposal in a specific capacity. You told me. I want to make sure you've actually decided, he said, not just agreed because I asked. She looked at him. She had known Admiral Travis Mullen for 8 years. She had served under him for 3 of them and had been in the category of officially dead on his watch for 4 more, and he had maintained contact through channels that required more effort than most senior officers would have invested in a ghost. She understood what that meant. She also understood that his investment in her continued functioning was not purely personal. She was operationally valuable, and he was a man who took his mission seriously. But she had decided a long time ago that understanding the practical dimension of his care did not require her to dismiss the other dimension. "I've decided," she said. "You're sure?" "I ran a decision process that lasted roughly 4 years," she said. "I'm sure." He nodded. "The check-in protocol. Every 5 days, I haven't missed one." "I know, I've been tracking." "I know you have," she said. He looked at her for a moment. The particular look of a person who has a lot more to say and has decided, correctly, that what they have to say is less important than the relationship that would be strained by saying all of it. "Are you at peace with what happened?" he said. "The 4th engagement, now that you have the full picture." She thought about the answer. "I'm at peace with what I did," she said. "I'm not at peace with the system failure that made it possible, but that's what the rebuild is for." She paused. "Peace with everything is not the target. Functioning clearly with the truth of it is." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a better answer than I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Something more resolved sounding." He stood. "The truth is usually messier." "Yes," she said. "It is." He put out his hand. She shook it. "Monday, I want a call," he said. "Curriculum timeline." "You'll have it." He went. The graduation ceremony for the current training cycle ran on a Friday afternoon. It was not an elaborate event. This was a training program, not a commissioning, and the ceremony reflected the functional culture she had been building for 5 weeks. Simple, real, no performance for its own sake. The trainees who had completed the cycle stood in the afternoon light in front of the range they had spent 8 weeks on, and their scores were formally posted, and they received their qualification certifications from Owens, who had been the lead operational instructor for the cycle, and who delivered the brief remarks with the economical sincerity of a man who was better at showing what he meant than at describing it. Mara stood to the side. She was not the ceremony's center. She had not been the trainee's primary instructor. She had come in late. She had contributed to specific elements. She had built the framework that the next cycle would use more fully. What she had done in this cycle was harder to point to, and more important for being harder to point to. Calloway graduated 3rd in the cycle. He caught her eye after the ceremony and did not say anything. Gave a brief, direct nod. She returned it. Devereaux was 1st in the cycle on the field assessment component. He shook Owens's hand after the posting and then walked a few paces away and stood alone for a moment in the way of a person absorbing something they had worked hard for, not yet ready to share the feeling of it. Briggs was 1st overall. She watched him receive the posting. Watched the way he held himself when his name was read. Not performing, not suppressing, but present to it, the achievement landing in him cleanly. After the ceremony, when the group was breaking up and the afternoon was going golden toward evening, Briggs walked past her toward the barracks. He stopped. "Thank you," he said. "You shot the score," she said. I know." He held her look. "Thank you anyway." She let that stand. He went. She stayed on the range after everyone had cleared. The sun was doing its desert thing, fast and total, the way it always did here, the shadows of the mountains moving across the valley floor in the long evening light. The wind was off the northeast again, which was the direction it had been on the day she had walked through the gate to lane 14 with the key from the hook and fired a round at a target nearly a mile away. 47 days ago. She walked out to lane 14 now. The gate was no longer padlocked. She had removed the lock in her 2nd week as the official posting began, on the grounds that a properly maintained lane should be accessible for legitimate use, and that a locked gate was a symptom of deferred maintenance rather than a genuine security measure. The lane was now on the active rotation. The target mechanism had been repaired. The scoring terminal was calibrated. She walked to the end of the lane. She stood at the 1,547-meter mark and looked back toward the firing point. From here, the base was a collection of low buildings and vehicles, and the flag above the operations center moving in the northeast wind. The range flags were turning. The light was going amber and long. She had stood in this exact spot, in the opposite direction, 47 days ago and decided to go back in. She had been right. She had also been wrong about some things. She had underestimated how much she would come to care about the program, underestimated the people in it, underestimated the specific exhaustion of carrying 4 years of accumulated weight and then being allowed to set it down. She had expected resolution to feel cleaner than it felt. She had expected the fourth engagement's name to close something that turned out to be more complicated than a closure. She was still here. That was the thing she had not expected most of all. Not the investigation, not the curriculum, not the admiral's offer. The part she had not planned for was the staying, the choice to take the posting and mean it. The decision to be somewhere not as a ghost, not as a waiting presence, but as a person who had work to do and intended to do it. She was not the same person who had arrived in the rain with the duffel bag and the folder of transfer paperwork. She was not entirely different. She was the version of herself that knew what she could carry and had learned at significant cost the difference between carrying something and being buried by it. The wind moved across the range. The flags turned. She looked at the firing point a mile away, at the small structure of the prep bay, at the target that now stood correctly on its mechanism in the golden light. Then she turned. She walked back down the lane the long way, all 1,547 meters, taking her time, feeling the ground under her feet and the cooling air and the sound of the base settling into its evening rhythm behind her. At the gate, she paused. She looked back once at the target. A full stop, properly placed. She went home. The strongest people in any room are not always the loudest ones. They are often the ones who have already survived what the room hasn't imagined yet, and who show up anyway, in a faded uniform, ready to work.